the regular meeting of the City of Sonoma Planning Commission for March 8th, 2018. And if I could have the roll call, please.
Commissioner Barnett.
Here.
Commissioner Jansen.
Here.
Commissioner Willander.
Here.
Chair Felder.
Here.
Commissioner Bohar.
Here.
Commissioner McDonald.
Here.
Commissioner Corrado.
Here.
Okay, and if I could ask Commissioner Bohar to lead us in the pledge, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started, just run through a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, please, if you have cell phones or other devices that make noise, put them on silent mode. If we have a reasonably long agenda tonight, if any items are not heard until 10:30, it will be at the discretion of the commission by a majority vote to continue. Otherwise, we will try to schedule that item as closely as we can to this date. If there's any decision reached by the commission tonight you have 15 days to appeal it to the City Council, so just take that in mind. Also, we will be asking you to keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. We have a timer. I'll attempt not to be too strict on how I enforce it, but if I think that it's gone about far enough, I will ask you to terminate your comments. With that, we come to the area of the meeting where we accept comments from the public on items not appearing on the agenda. So if anybody would like to make comments on items other than those on the agenda, you may approach the podium now, please. When you approach the podium, I'd ask you to please state your name and address. And seeing none, we will continue with the rest of the agenda. David, review and acceptance of agenda.
Thank you. There are some changes to the agenda or agenda actions tonight. I was not able to get you the minutes, so we don't have any minutes to review tonight. I apologize for that. Secondly, with respect to item 4, which is an application involving the reconfiguration and expansion of the cheese factory, the updated recommendation is to continue that item to the special meeting of March 22nd. That's a previously scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission. This is at the request of State Parks. They're a partner of ours, and we want to honor their request for some additional time to review the project.
Thank you. Now I'll let you swing right into late correspondence.
Well, it's at your place. Sorry, late correspondence is at your place. Everything that was received following the distribution of the staff report, and one last minute item that I brought in were the conditions of approval and also a zoning compliance letter associated with MacArthur Place that was requested by Commissioner McDonald, so I made copies for the commission.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will, are there any other additions or consideration of changes to the agenda from the commission? Seeing none, we will move to item number 1, which is a public hearing. The application for an acceptance to the maximum floor area for an attached accessory dwelling unit. The property is located at 628 Lausoon Street. And with that, I'll ask for a staff report from Wendy, please.
Thank you, Chair Felder and members of the Commission. The subject property is a 7,371 square foot parcel located on the north side of Lausoon Street, across from Carson Court. The property is currently developed with a single-family home with a detached garage constructed in 1967. In 2002, a building permit was issued that allowed the existing garage to be converted to a laundry room, restroom, and 2 bedrooms. The project involves construction of a 494 square foot, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom attached accessory dwelling unit. The accessory dwelling unit is proposed and in an existing area of the residence, currently developed with a laundry room, restroom, and 2 bedrooms. The existing residence is 1,483 square feet. While in most cases, accessory dwelling units are permitted administratively, an attached accessory dwelling unit having a floor area greater than 30% of the existing living area of the main dwelling requires the approval of an exception by this commission. In this case, the resulting main dwelling would have an area of 989 square feet, which would limit the area of the accessory dwelling unit to 297 square feet. And the applicant is requesting the larger unit size to limit additional modifications to the existing footprint. The proposal is consistent with the general plan, and with regard to development consistency, the proposal is consistent with the density, height, and setback, and floor area ratio and coverage. The proposal is not consistent with regard to use in order to be reviewed administratively. Because accessory dwelling units greater than 30% of the existing living area of the main dwelling unit are subject to review and approval by this commission. Regarding the recently adopted additional development code requirements for attached accessory dwelling units, I would note that this accessory dwelling unit is within 1/2 mile of a public transit stop, and the accessory dwelling unit is part of the existing single-family dwelling. Therefore, no additional off-street parking is required, and no external modifications are being made or proposed to the building. Either the primary or the accessory dwelling unit must be owner-occupied, and conditions of approval have been included regarding these provisions. And the individual sale of the primary or accessory unit is not allowed. And this is also included in the conditions of approval. The proposed accessory dwelling unit is marginally different than what would otherwise be allowed at this location administratively with the building permit. In addition, the unit is compatible with its surroundings and would provide rental housing consistent with the general plan. And staff's recommending approval of the exception subject to attached conditions of approval in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Are there any questions of staff? Linda?
Wendy, I just want to be clear. So the structure exists as it is, and what's triggering the need for it to come to planning is because we're putting in a kitchen? Is that what's triggering?
It's because the attached accessory dwelling unit exceeds 30% of the existing dwelling. If it was less than 30%, we could approve it administratively.
Okay, so she's using it basically right now as just 2 extra bedrooms?
Yes.
And so everything is fine under those conditions, but putting in that kitchen and that door, making it an accessory dwelling unit kicks it to us, right?
Right, because it's over 30% of the existing residents.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And Wendy, administrative approval comes into play whether it's a different structure or within the existing structure? It just has to do with how large the existing house is?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, then we'll open the public hearing, and if the applicant would like to come forward and speak on this, please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Barbara Nuss, and I bought this residence about a year and a half ago. And it has an existing attached garage that they converted in 2002 to the 2 bedrooms and the bathroom, and then the laundry area was kept there where the laundry area was in the garage. And then they had a carport constructed. So I'm under current permit to build a detached garage. I'm in the process of doing that right now, and then I wanted to convert this area in the front of my house into another dwelling unit. And the limitation came with the square footage, because it's existing, and I don't have any way I can take off 200 square feet,
Okay.
logically anyways.
If that's it, do you have any questions of the applicant? Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would care to speak on this item from the public? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for comments, discussion, motions.
Actually, I have a question that's actually directed to staff. I might have missed this in the conditions of approval, but if we're adding a new dwelling unit, would it be a good idea to add a condition of approval requiring that a separate address plaque be attached to the house so a separate unit could be identified by police and the fire department?
That typically isn't a condition of approval, but will be done when the building permit is submitted.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion on this item?
Well, I'll just make a comment. It seems to me that it's appropriate and that the owner should have the right to do what she wants to do here. It's her idea of design. I'd be inclined to want to support that.
I would just move that we approve the application as submitted.
Can I add some more comments?
Yeah, let's see if we have a second.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Further comments?
The comments I wanted to make is that I'm supportive of this project, and I want to make it clear why I'm supportive of the project. One is that there's 2 covered and 2 uncovered parking spaces, there's a total of 4, which shows and demonstrates there's more than adequate parking on site. That the floor area of the total habitable structure is roughly 0.2 or 1/3 less than allowed by code. So we're talking about a smaller building in footprint, that the lot coverage is roughly 0.2 or half less than what is allowed by code, and that the unit is contained within an existing residence and that no new additional floor area is required for this unit or for this building, and that the main dwelling unit is still 50% larger than the apartment. So given those factors, leads me to the conclusion that I would support this. Under different circumstances, I might not necessarily be supportive of a project like this.
Any other further comment? Otherwise, I will call for a vote on the motion to accept this project as presented with the conditions of approval. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously 7-0. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Just in case anyone who is may have arrived late, the item on the cheese factory has been continued to the next meeting of March 22nd, so it will not be heard tonight, item number 4. With that, we will move on to item number 2, which is a public hearing, the application for a modification to an existing use permit for a food cart as it relates to size, and a use permit to allow outdoor seating in conjunction with a wine bar and tap room. Project location is 455 West Napa Street. And with that, the staff report, please, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair Felder and members of the Commission. The project site is an 8,840 square foot parcel located on the south side of West Napa Street in front of the Safeway parking lot. The property is currently developed with a motor scooter company and a coffee cart. It was previously used as a service station. To summarize the background information in the staff report, the applicants currently have a use permit to operate a drive-through coffee business in conjunction with retail sales on the property. And last month, the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission approved design review associated with patio umbrellas and a fire pit for Cafe Scuderia, contingent upon this commission approving outdoor seating in conjunction with a wine bar tap room use on the property. The applicant is proposing a modification to a use permit for a food cart as it relates to size, and a use permit to allow outdoor seating in conjunction with a wine bar tap room. To summarize the applicant's proposal, in addition to the retail use of the property, the scooter sales and the coffee cart, the applicant is proposing to expand the use of the cart to incorporate the sale of wine and beer and provide outdoor seating in the form of 25 seats. The applicant has stated that an application for alcohol beverage control, type 40, on-sale beer, or type 41, on-sale beer and wine for a bona fide public eating place, will be submitted if approved by the Planning Commission. A maximum of 5 employees would support the uses on the property, and the proposed hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 5 a.m. until 10 p.m., Saturday, 6 a.m. until 10 p.m., and Sunday, 6:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. The applicant indicated that the cart would be located on the north side of the building with 2 lanes available in front of the building for queuing vehicles as currently laid out. The size of the proposed coffee, beer, and wine cart is 14 feet, 4.5 inches, and a walk-up service counter is proposed at the rear of the cart. The drive-through area currently and would continue to allow for 7 vehicles to queue on the site. Outdoor seating is proposed in the form of 25 outdoor seats, and the outdoor seating would be located at the east and south area of the Wingo Motorcycle Building. And it should be noted that up to 5 seats are permitted inside the building to conduct business related to selling motorcycles and associated retail items. The proposal is consistent with the general plan and with regard to development code consistency. The property zone commercial and drive-in and drive-through sales and wine bars and tap rooms are allowed in this zoning designation. With regard to on-site parking, parking for the retail motor scooter company is provided in the form of 4 spaces, including 1 accessible space. The drive-through coffee cart doesn't result in any requirement for additional off-street parking. However, the proposal for outdoor seating could require additional off-street parking. The applicant is proposing 25 outdoor seats, and the parking requirement for a wine bar tap room is 1 space for each 4 seats. For outdoor seating, no off-street parking is required for up to 25% of the approved indoor seats. But no indoor seating is proposed in conjunction with the coffee cart or wine bar tap room. Therefore, the number of required off-street parking spaces is determined by this commission. In the review of project issues, staff has identified 5 issues. One is with regard to the restaurant use. So as I mentioned, the applicant is considering 2 ABC license types. A 41, an on-sale beer and wine for bona fide public eating place, would require additional public noticing for a restaurant and could not be considered by the commission tonight. Alcohol sales from a mobile cart. Staff was informed that the alcohol beverage control doesn't issue licenses for vehicles such as a food cart. On-site parking, I just addressed that the applicant was requesting 25 outdoor seats. The applicant has also stated that in addition to the 4 parking spaces, 6 motorcycle parking spaces and a bicycle rack are proposed. The applicant has stated that 5 employees will be employed at the site, and staff is concerned that the existing parking on the site may not accommodate 5 employees. With regard to intensification of use, in 2011, staff expressed concerns that the future of the business may propose to operate in a more intensive manner. And to address this issue, conditions of approval were approved that limited the size of the coffee cart to not exceed 9.5 feet. And at this time, the applicant is proposing to increase the size of the cart to 14 feet, 4.5 inches. And outdoor storage needs. The project narrative states that continued use of existing storage area is included in this application, but no additional information was provided to support the request. So staff is recommending the application being denied because alcohol sales from the cart is not an alcohol beverage control approved use. And also, selling alcohol from the cart is not supported by the police chief, and it's unclear that adequate parking is available to support the intensified use. In the event the Planning Commission approves the proposal, draft conditions of approval have been included for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Questions of staff?
Okay. All right, I have a couple of questions, Wendy. I noticed, I went to the site and I sat for a while, and there is a space behind the existing truck now. It's got an overhang to it, and I saw a counter and people standing behind it, and the people coming in to get their coffee were there. Is that part of the original permit?
So this application originated through a code enforcement issue, and that addition is going to be removed. So that's not part of this proposal.
Okay, so they're just existing until it gets removed in that environment?
Right. It's my understanding they're applying for a demolition permit to demolish that overhang.
Okay. My second question, I noticed some contradictions in the narrative by the applicant, and the main one was their goal is to continue their existing business, but when you get towards the end, it says the essence of our request is to allow outdoor seating and the improvement of our coffee cart and the opportunity to serve beer and wine. And then he goes further on to say that Pete's was granted an exception. Is that correct?
So Pete's did receive a use permit approval. Pete's has 7 parking spaces, which allows them 28 indoor seats, and that's what their use permit states.
But yet they have 50 seats?
I'm not sure how many seats
Okay,
Pete's
so
has.
there is no basis of fact that supports that statement, that other institutions of this sort or businesses have been granted the use permit without having the correct parking? Is that?
I would just say that parking exceptions have been granted over the years for any number of businesses. That's done on a case-by-case basis by the Planning Commission. It's an allowance in the Development Code. The question is whether, the facts in this instance support the parking exception that is requested and the level of the exception that has been requested.
Okay, that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Council.
Wendy, has Chief Sackett's opinion on this project changed? Because in the petitions that were submitted, they said that they have an endorsement from Chief Sackett, and in your staff report it says he doesn't support it.
Sure. So I had a conversation with Chief Sackett about this proposal, and it's my understanding that when the applicants met with Chief Sackett, they were proposing to serve alcohol not from the coffee cart, but from an area in the patio. And that's what Chief Sackett supported. But that is different than what the applicant has requested.
Wendy, did I understand that the commission's involved in approving the beer and wine sales, or did I misunderstand that? Partly? Are we involved in that?
Well, yes, that's the application for selling beer and wine.
Okay, I suppose I misunderstood because I thought it was primarily to approve the 25 outdoor seats that would ultimately be used by an ABC license requirement. I misunderstood that.
Right, so you're...
It's both, yeah.
Pardon me?
It's both.
It's both. Oh, I've never been involved in approving an ABC type thing. I didn't realize. How's that happen?
I mean, just to be super clear, you are not being asked to approve an ABC license because only the ABC
Right.
can approve an ABC license. But part of this application is a request to operate essentially as a wine bar tap room, that is to sell people wine and/or beer. And that's a use permit, and that's subject to your review.
And as proposed, it's all coming out of the cart.
Correct?
Okay, thank you.
Now I have a question. Just to clarify, the primary purpose of this business is for the retail sales of scooters, correct? and that the origin of the coffee sales was an ancillary or kind of like a side part of the primary purpose, which was to sell scooters.
Yes.
And when subsequent approvals moved forward and the primary function of the site still remained retail sales of scooters.
Right, and that's a condition of approval for the coffee cart.
Okay. And so what we're looking at now is retail sales and a potential to have a restaurant on site?
No, we're not. You're not considering a restaurant this evening.
So the primary purpose of this use continues to function as a retail space for the sale of scooters?
Yes, with the addition of beer and wine.
And I have a question. What is the area devoted to retail sales for scooters on site?
I don't know, but the applicant may have that information.
Okay, because I'd like to understand the ratio of area devoted to scooters, sales and repairs versus the area that's being requested for seating and for the use for sale of coffee. Just to clarify what, what we're looking at here in terms of function and form. So, thanks.
Any other questions of staff?
Wendy, could you clarify for me what I misunderstood about it is not allowed to sell beer and wine from a mobile cart? Is that my understanding, as Mr. Goodison
Right.
pointed out?
That's what the ABC told me, that they cannot issue a license to sell from a vehicle.
Okay, so tell me again, how are we involved in that illegality that doesn't meet regulations?
Well, it sets up
What is the issue?
It sets up a conflict, because if you were to approve this use permit, they couldn't get an ABC license to implement it.
And that's quite clear. That is not disputable. If they're not going to get a license to operate beer and wine from this cart.
That's correct.
Mr. Wellender.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Carrying on with that thought process then, why is it before us then?
We communicated these issues with the applicants, and we asked them if they wanted to withdraw or suspend the application to, look at these different questions, and we have not heard back from them.
And one more question, if nobody else has one. The applicant, however, could request and look at any time a different use on site that where the primary function of the business is coffee sales and ancillary food services. As an example, there's a whole bunch of other options that may be available where alcohol sales doesn't occur from an actual mobile vending area.
Yes, there are other options.
Okay, thank you.
But to clarify, that option is not in front of us tonight, is that correct?
Right.
One more.
So if the applicant wanted to have coffee service on these proposed outdoor chairs and tables, he could do so, but that's not up to us to separate the alcohol from the coffee, correct?
The previous condition of approval for the coffee cart does not allow for any outdoor seating.
Right, and this one combines coffee and beer and wine, so if the applicant wanted to eliminate the beer and wine in the patio area and the requirement for the chairs and tables, he would have to do so. Is that accurate? We're not here to separate the two and say, you can have the coffee on the tables, but you can't have the beer and wine.
Well, it would be a somewhat different application at least, and in that instance, while the commission wouldn't need to consider the conflict with the ABC license, there's still consideration there of parking issues, but we haven't heard that specific proposal from the applicant.
That would have to come from the applicant, that's my point, right? Okay, thank you.
With that, I think we'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to address the commission?
All right, how's everybody?
Please state your name.
My name is Nick Grimm. I own Cafe Scuderia and Sorrento Imports. We've been in business for 10 years now, and we've morphed a few times over the years. We started as just a dealership and added coffee 7 years ago. And so this current change came about because we have to remove storage off of the back of the building, which kind of changes what we can do with a dealership and how viable running an actual dealership can be. We're limited to just the interior space, which is about 800 square feet. So we've worked with all the city officials to try to find a solution. That's why we feel our business is threatened, is we can't operate a dealership as we have. So at this point, we're trying to find the next chapter to do our story down there. And we'd like to add the outdoor seating to make that, try to expand the coffee shop. We are going to continue to run a dealership. It's just going to be limited to what it's been over the years. Normally we've had anywhere from 20 to 40 bikes, for sale at one time. So now we're going down to about a 10 bike inventory. So meeting with the city officials, we all kind of came up with this outdoor seating solution. Allows us to hopefully, make the same revenue that we have over the years, if not more. So part of this beer and wine license is to supplement the loss of the dealership and the service we've had. To clarify the beer and wine issue, we were contacted by city staff last Monday about the current change now with the, I did speak with the police chief and the ABC. I did have, from my understanding, I had approval, I had the backing from the police chief to serve beer and wine. If you see in the new drawings, we've shifted the cart slightly so that we are serving to the back patio. So I think it might need to be clarified exactly what's going on there, but it is our intention to serve off the back of the cart into the back patio. So from my what I believe Brett understood was that the police chief was that we were serving to the rear patio, which we do have his approval on, from what I understand. And we've also contacted the ABC in the last week, previously before, but to try to clarify if we could serve off of a cart. The issue seems to be that you cannot serve off of a mobile food truck, but we are not a mobile food truck. We are a stationary business. We stay in that one location every day. So they've said they would come out and work with us and try to figure out a solution. From my understanding, this is where we start with the Planning Commission to try to get approval to serve beer and wine so that we can go to the police chief and ABC and follow the road to see if we can actually make this viable. But we are asking for approval to go down that road from you guys tonight. Part of this too, and moving the coffee cart, is we would like to remove the restrictions on the original build. There was concern that if we left this location, that anybody could come in and open a drive-through coffee shop. So part of that three-wheeled restriction with the size requirements was tied to the original design, literally measuring the cart that we had originally and saying, this is what can be allowed. We've been doing this for 7 years, and we're ready to go ready for a remodel. We're ready to go to the next size up, which is like design, still a three-wheeled scooter, just like to redesign the back half of the cart, which would add a few feet. So that would all be approved by Health Department. And we're asking for that restriction to be removed and moved up to 14 and a half feet. So also with our parking ratio, we're trying to add 6 motorcycle parking spots, and we have 4 traditional parking spots currently. So we're looking at, from my math, about 22 seats would be approved off of that. And obviously it sounds like the outdoor seating requirements don't exactly trigger that, they don't jive with the the parking requirements, but we're asking for 25 outdoor seats, and there's 5 inside for the dealership. So we're hoping a variance could be issued to allow us to have that seating ratio. to clarify what we've seen with Pete's Coffee is, I think I forget the exact number, but we're including outdoor seating that as well. And from our math, I think we see about 48, 50 seats there total to their 6 or 7 parking spots. Also, our shop, we've been there for quite some time. We've become a hub for locals to walk up, to ride up, to motorcycles, bicycles. It is one of the kind of last gathering spots I see in this town that all the locals come to every day, and we like to keep it that way. We like that local feel. We like to give them some more comfortable seating options. There really is none there, as well as we attract a lot of tourists. Obviously, with it's a very unique business, and when they walk up, there is no formula for somebody to walk up and buy a coffee. They don't know where to go. So we're trying to redesign this so there's an inviting outdoor seating area and a designated counter for them to go to. We feel that the outdoor seating would also promote more of walk-up and, walk, bicycle, motorcyclist customers to actually come and hang out for a while. We're a small, locally owned business that's we've been around for a while. We'd like to stay around for a lot longer, so.
All right, thank
If
you.
you guys can issue a variance for the seating and just allow us to pursue the beer and wine license. Thank you, guys.
Anybody else from the public care to speak? Please approach the podium if you care to speak. State your name.
Hi, I'm Mike White. I'm a regular customer there, and I would just like you to keep in mind that they are local people, and they do serve a great purpose here. As he said, there's a cross-section of Sonoma meets there every day, and a lot of the talk will turn to Sonoma, and tourists really, they find it interesting, and we can send them to other businesses too, which we are happy to do. And I met a lot of people from a lot of different countries. I ride my motorcycle there, by the way. And it's really enjoyable, and as he said, it's a hub. It's better than reading the paper, I'll tell you. So I hope you take that into consideration. They're good people, and it is a good business. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Carissa Grimm. I'm one of the owners of Cafe Scuderia. I just wanted to say that, and speak on behalf of us business owners, that we were born and raised in the Valley. Our families have had businesses in the Valley. My family still owns and operates a dairy in Shelville. We have 3 small children. We opened when our oldest was 5 weeks old, and he worked with us for the first 7 months of Scuderia. Then we hired our first employee. And it's not easy living here in the Valley. It's very expensive. And we're trying to be creative and innovative and come up with business solutions that we feel like keep getting thrown back at us by regulations, state, city, and we're pretty creative and trying to keep a unique business here in Sonoma. That's why we came to the beer and wine. Seems like it's a great fit. And we would just like you to consider that we are hardworking, upstanding citizens that want to continue to have a business and a family and raise a family here in the Valley. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Logan Harvey, 578 Estimadera. So just a couple points that kind of struck me. It doesn't seem like there should be too much, I don't think the Planning Commission should be too concerned with what the ABC would do. If it's not allowed on a mobile unit, there's a lot of solutions to keep the scooter cart. You could take the wheels off, you could take the engine out, make it non-mobile, and that could be a simple solution that would allow for it. As far as parking goes, 4 slots maybe is kind of small, but my parents' house is at 527 Mariano Drive, so right in that area. And that Safeway parking lot's never full. Now, of course, you shouldn't count that in, but I think overflow parking wouldn't be too much of a problem for that. So I don't think you're going to see people parking on West Napa or West Spain, or West Napa, obviously. I don't think it's legal to do that anyway, so I don't think you're going to see too much overflow parking. I don't really see too big of a problem with this at all, but that's your job.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak?
How's it going, everybody? My name is David Niles, and I am a minor investor in the Grimm's business. And I didn't think I wanted to speak because I think that they encapsulate the business the most, but I think at the beginning, there was a lot of questions, and I thought that maybe I could help clarify, because we had a difficult time with this as well. It's not an easy process to do what we're trying to do and to make this change. There's been a lot of navigating through the rules and regulations of what we can actually do on the property. And we spent a lot of time trying to come up with ideas, having, I'm sorry, let me take one step back. One of the reasons we came to this was the loss of the space behind our shop, behind the shop, due to some intervention from the city. And so as we encountered that problem, we came to the city with some people, and we're looking for solutions to keep the business alive. What could we do to make this business work? And we had 3 solutions that we thought would be helpful for us. If we could do this, we could survive. If we could do this, we could survive. And with that group of people, we kind of came up with what you see before you. And that's where the seats come from, and that's where that request for alcohol. Now, I totally understand the confusion here, because we've been working with ABC and the local sheriff, and the time constraints on this didn't allow us to clarify some of the inconsistencies you're seeing. But I think the intent here is for us to have use of our entire space at where we work, so we can keep this business alive. And the way that we think we can do that is by adding these seats and hopefully incorporating beer and wine if we're able to. Now, I think we're very happy working through those hopes with the ABC and coming up with other solutions if we need to. I think we've proven that we're willing to listen to the city and do those things to get that license. But most importantly, I think what we're looking for is for you guys, for an acknowledgement of maybe what the Grimms have been doing and what they've been going through since we got our initial letter from the city. It's effectively shut down half of what they've been doing. And they've been working really hard, I think, and cooperatively with the city to come up with solutions, and that brings us here today. So I would hope that this is an opportunity for, we hear about small, local, and unique businesses a lot and what you guys do and what you're trying to achieve, and bringing them in. And I hope that same preference and ideas can be brought to keeping a local, small, unique business, because the myriad of regulations that need to be navigated are quite a bit, and I think that they've done a really good job in finding solutions to keep themselves alive, and it will be a benefit to some.
Going to have to ask you to wind it up, please.
Okay, I'm done there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Anyone else care to speak on this?
Good evening. David Lawrence, Nut Tree Court. So I got to tell you, I'm a neophyte when it comes to the Planning Commission. I did a little research in advance of this, got on Wikipedia to see what might be a relevant statement to make, and y'all will be the judge. I probably will not do very well. But I'll start out with this comment. I moved to Sonoma in 1983. Things have changed a lot since then. One that hasn't is that my best friend, David Niles, is still here, and we met in that year. And so I would just make one comment that David and his family, I think, have been great stewards for the city of Sonoma in multiple ways, and I think he would continue to do that. To transition and echo some of his comments just about Scudery in general, I can tell you that from a spending standpoint, my wife does a good job of keeping them in business. So I know she's a big supporter. After we drop the kids off at St. Francis, she likes to go by there. But really, his comments around small business in this town, I'm not a very political person. I never have been, but I follow the news, and I do follow what I think the mayor and the council likes to say, which is we like to support local small businesses, family-owned businesses. And so if you can see your way clear of maybe some of these nuances that Dave mentioned, that I think that kind of like the spirit that we have is pretty much anything's attainable if we put our mind to it. So that's what I'd ask of all of you, is to think about the business, think about what these folks have done to add to the community, and hopefully continue to do so. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I don't see anyone else approaching, so with that, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible action. You may start.
Well, I'm going to come back with a question, because I am a little confused. What precipitated this whole process was the closure of the shed in the back, is that correct?
Well, we received a complaint about that, yes.
Okay, and was that shed used to help restore motorcycles and repair?
That's my understanding.
So they went from 40 motorcycles down to, what, 10? Because the shed is closed, is that correct?
I'm not sure.
If there's going to be questions for the applicants, which is perfectly fine, we would want to invite them back up to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
If that, through the chair, I apologize.
No, that's fine, and I think that's what we heard.
Yeah. Okay, so they can't, they're having a hard time functioning with a sale of trying to sell 10 scooters versus the 40, and therefore they're trying to be creative in expanding so that they can make money, and that's the crux of this project, right? Am I correct? Okay.
That's a good summary.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess this is a question for staff. It might be something that's the applicant can answer as well, but now that the storage sheds have been cleared and the space is available for just about anything, including seating, is the city preventing the outdoor storage of retail sales inventory?
Well, depending on what would be proposed, it may require review by design review.
So I'm just saying, like, if this was an auto dealership and there was covered area to store cars and that was removed, the auto dealer could still keep the cars on an open lot. And I guess my question is that violating any sort of principle? Would the applicant be able to continue to store and provide inventory in the back of the existing gasoline station, or the?
Well, I think the issue would be, how would those scooters be secured?
Okay, and I guess my question is, the applicant is not prevented from coming forward to the planning commission or design review and asking for the construction of a covered or secured area. It would be a different application, but there's nothing that would prevent them from doing that. They have the ability to do that?
Well, it's my understanding, and Wendy, you may have more detail on this, but there are some significant building code issues associated with creating any kind of permanent structure back there.
Okay. And then my last question has to do with, I don't want to jump the gun, but I would assume that this is like a historic building because it's over 50 years old, and if there was any modifications or changes to the structure or additions, that would have to be looked at with respect to the historic integrity of that building, correct?
Right, so the building is over 50 years old. Is it historic? I don't know. But if they were proposing any exterior modifications, it would require review by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank you.
No.
Again, question for staff. It's a carryover regarding the storage. So the trigger point was a complaint about some storage in the back that then caused the city to respond and declare it unacceptable.
There was an addition made to the building that was not approved by this commission.
And just out of curiosity, was there some discussion about recognizing that if storage was the critical issue, was there some discussion about thinking outside the box on how that might be resolved without abdicating building code requirements? In other words, if the storage was the issue and it was deemed unacceptable in its current configuration, was there any discussion about what might be acceptable? Because if I'm hearing correctly, if it wasn't for this, they wouldn't be before us having to come up with another creative aspect of their business.
Well, the planning department and the building department met together with the applicant.
Okay,
And went over some ideas.
okay. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Carol.
Wendy, you and I spoke this afternoon. I just want to say that I visited the site, which I've been to before, and pardon me, spoke with the applicant also, okay? Let me ask you a question about the storage area, okay? How long ago was that constructed, do you know?
No.
There's nothing there that looked like it was yesterday.
No,
that's
it
for
wasn't
sure.
recent. I think it was a number of years. I'm not sure of the exact date.
So just
But it was
out of-
after the issuance of the use permit.
So why would you get a kind of a complaint at this point? I mean, I guess I'm kind of puzzled by that. Do you know?
I don't know why we got it.
We don't know what prompted the complaint, but when it was made, we investigated and we discovered that it had been constructed without permits. After the use permit for the project had been issued.
Okay. Was it constructed without benefit of permits by this particular applicant?
I don't know who built it. I'd like to make that clear. All we know, it was built on the property after the use permit was issued.
Okay.
That's all I personally know, let me put it that way.
Anyone else want to chime in? Go ahead.
From the description of the request and the discussion, it appears that we really couldn't vote on this based on the apparent fact that the cart cannot be used for beer and wine sales. It's not going to meet regulations, and all that has to be done, and they have to reapply for this, really? It doesn't appear to be a votable item.
Well, let me put it this way. Staff would not recommend approving a use permit around which there's some substantial question as to whether or not a key permit like an ABC license can be granted when we have reason to believe that it might not be granted. Maybe it's possible to look at other options. It's been suggested. Maybe it doesn't need to be a wheeled vehicle. Perhaps if it were a permanent structure, an ABC license could be granted. But that leads to other issues that we would need to explore that we haven't explored because it wasn't presented to staff in that manner. And I totally understand the frustrations of the applicants and the fact that they, are dealing with, a myriad of different regulations, and it can be difficult to navigate their way through. But from the staff perspective, we need to treat this very carefully because it's a use permit. A use permit's not tied to these applicants who, have been doing well in terms of making, providing this unique business. The use permit runs with the land. It's not tied to the applicants. So if consideration was going to be given to going with a permanent structure, staff would want to examine the implications of that. And even apart from that, there's two other questions. One being just, is this a great spot for that use that's being proposed? I mean, in terms of alcohol service. And second, just the level of the parking exception.
May I ask another question? Typically, David, then you have somewhat coordinated the ABC feasibility along with an application like this so that you're aware of the fit before it comes before the commission. That's a routine process you go through? This is unusual then, is that what I'm asking?
Maybe that someone needs to turn off their microphone. Thank you. Well, we don't see this type of application very often. In fact, this is probably the only application quite like this that we've ever seen, but we typically ask the applicants to investigate ABC issues and coordinate that with the police chief.
And provide some feedback to you that it's likely feasible or
Right.
something like that. Okay. And so the seating requirement really is secondary to this use, this beer and wine use and so forth. There's no point in talking about parking until we've got a facility going. Is that accurate? I don't mean parking and seating together.
Only if we have direct.
Well, the issues that the commission chooses to focus on are up to the planning commission.
Well, I just want to make a note. I think this is kind of an interesting local, semi-funky setup down there. It's charming, and it's an interesting location with the old gas station. And I think these men are working diligently to try to put two somewhat disparate businesses together to make it a good enterprise. I'm very empathetic for it, but it looks like it's fraught with some issues here before us tonight that I don't see a solution to.
Let me just jump in for one quick moment. I see the applicant hoping to come up and approach again, but since I've closed the public hearing, I cannot entertain that unless there's a specific question from the commission to address you. So I'm sorry, you've had your time to speak, and unless we have questions to ask of you, we'll have to just continue this discussion without your interjection.
And if I could just make one more comment. If there is interest in the planning commission, on the part of the planning commission, in exploring different alternatives associated with this proposal, of course, we're happy to do that. And, if that was a direction that the commission wanted to go in, then you might consider continuing this item to your regular April meeting with, feedback and direction on different issues that you would like us to look at.
Yeah. All right. Kelso.
Is this an appropriate application for a temporary use permit?
Well, I would say that given the ABC license issue, that's not a great fit. I hadn't thought of that, to be honest. So let me think about that a little bit more.
Would that help facilitate the ABC process on their end if we granted them temporary use for perhaps 6 months? It would allow them to at least sort of get a signal of support from us. Maybe they could work out their ABC issues, and then if it doesn't work out, then the use permit expires in 6 months.
Well,
Or 3 months.
the problem that I see with that is if we would give them the use permit, even a temporary one, and they started to conduct the business as they see it without an ABC license, then we're really getting ourselves into a mess.
Well, they couldn't, right? They couldn't sell alcohol without.
Not legally.
Well, I guess one of my concerns would be, and that it's a very interesting concept, and maybe it is something that could be pursued, but one of my concerns about it just is the fact that it's an investment that is being made. They are proposing to bring in this new, larger vehicle. I have to believe that that's a pretty substantial investment,
Right.
and it's just risky to, on their part and on the city's part, I believe, to say, well, if this doesn't work in a year, you wasted all that money.
Right.
I have one last question of staff, and it has to do with the zoning and permitted and use permit applications. The property zone commercial, and it seems as though the use has slowly moved away from its primary function, which was the retail sales of scooters, and has now become a destination place for the sale of coffee and drive-through for coffee. And I wanted to understand the differences if a new application was submitted where the planning commission was looking at the sale of coffee, the sale of alcohol as a retail business, and ancillary to that would be minor sales of scooters. I don't know what the ultimate business plan is of the applicant, but if it was looked at in a different way, would that require additional parking? Would that keep the parking at the same? Or would it put the planning commission at an advantage to better grant an exception to parking? So these are all like questions I have, just trying to vet through all of these different scenarios and trying to find out the best way to be able to approach this specific use permit versus looking at a whole new application and a whole new plan. So maybe that may be food for thought for the future if we decided to look at this at another hearing, but I just wanted to see if you had any comments about that before we start discussing it at the commission level.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that the main issue associated with parking is associated with the seating, not so much the scooter use.
Okay, so it's not that there's a specific requirement for parking for the sale of scooters, and we didn't grant.
Well, there's
any parking.
overlap in the business, right? So the employees who, are operating the scooter business are also operating this other business, and so they're, with that overlap, there's definitely an opportunity to look at that as a shared activity for which somewhat less parking is required.
Okay, thank you.
It's not clear to me that we're going to reach any meaningful conclusion tonight, and I'm wondering if we should, if there's anyone on the commission would entertain, if you feel strongly about it, to continue this item and have the applicant come back with more clarification on what they intend to do and whether they have approval from the ABC to do it, and just clean up the whole application process.
I have just a question that maybe the other commissioners might agree upon. I think it might be still helpful to get a straw poll to see which one of our commissioners may or may not support the sale of alcohol on that site. Regardless of how much time the applicant has spent, there may be some strong feelings that people just don't feel that the sale of alcohol and beer at that site or in an area where there's mobile sales or drive-through sales is appropriate. But I don't know.
Well, I'm not very attuned to doing straw polls, but I certainly would entertain other comments from the commission on that idea.
Okay.
I have some comments that I'd like to share that I hope will help the applicant, both the men and the women who are running this business. And I want to support our small local businesses. I think that's really important. However, just as an aside, I know this isn't part of the application, people that come in through that drive-through, they come zooming in from the west, go straight across that line, and zip right up to the Scuderia. And cars coming out of Safeway are coming right like this. It was about a car length apart, but I thought, okay. So I'm not real keen on that exit there from the Safeway parking lot. And I know that has nothing to do with this, but I'm not keen on it. I am not in favor of alcohol sales. And I think what's triggering this whole process is the seating, the 25 seats, that's creating a parking issue, and parking is an issue. At least for me it is. And I would like to suggest that they do something creative, and I would be glad to help in any way I can, that we creatively come up with something, either with that storage shed or something that's not going to trigger the extra parking spaces, because I believe those 4 plus the 1, that's it, baby, that's all you got. And I'm not inclined to give an exception to that.
May I make a motion? I would like to make a motion. I believe and after having visited the site and everything, that basically, we've got a struggling business owned by young people, and it's local, and that's a very, very real plus to me, okay? The issues of alcohol or not alcohol are irrelevant to me. I think the main thing is that it's a struggling business, it's local, they want to do something. Whether this is the right thing to do, certainly it's not if it violates ABC regulations, is a whole different kettle of fish. I think the applicant needs to rethink what they really need to do in order to make this business work better. And so I don't like the idea of denying the application. I like the idea of continuing the application to a date certain, give them a certain amount of time. 30 days to me would be enough. If you can't come back with some kind of proposal within that time frame after it's been this long, then maybe, you don't have one, okay? And so my recommendation would be to continue to a date certain, approximately 30 days from now, and I don't know when that would be, and have the applicant come back to the city staff with a revised proposal that meets the regulations. ABC regulations, city regulations, and so forth.
I'd like to second that.
We still have discussion, right?
Yes, we will still have, and if it were the April meeting, it would be April 12th.
My first question is, and maybe I missed this, but does approval tonight or disapproval, whatever we do tonight, has no effect on what the ABC decides to do? Okay. I do think, was it Commissioner McDonald that brought it up about whether certain commissioners support alcohol or not? I mean,
Yes.
I don't think that's a horrible question to discuss, because if they're going to come back in 30 days and there's not a majority of commissioners that support alcohol use on this site, I wouldn't want them to waste their time, so to speak.
I think that's valid. So I guess I would like to hear from the rest of the commission as to where they weigh in on alcohol.
I don't
think-
have a problem.
Okay, I've heard
I mean, I
two
would
that
be
don't
open
have a
to
problem.
an
I've heard one that
application with
does,
it.
so that's 2-1.
I would defer my vote on alcohol or no alcohol based upon clarity on the police chief's decision. If the police chief is okay with it and have it cleared, no ambiguity between staff report and applicant, then I would take no exception to their request.
In a general way, I'm okay with the beer and wine. I think it's appropriate down there. Did I understand that the police chief's clearance was based on the cart issue rather than the stationary issue, or something else?
Right, so the police chief told me that he didn't have, that his understanding was the applicant was proposing to serve alcohol from the patio area, and he said he would support that use if approved by the planning commission.
Okay, so it wasn't a cart issue. ABC has a cart issue, not the police chief. Okay, fine. I'm fine with the beer and wine service.
I'm hearing that there's a sufficient support of the sale of alcohol to allow the applicant to continue to propose something in that same vein, and we have a motion on the floor to continue this application for clarity to a date certain to April 12th, and we have a second. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah. I'd like to just share that, as has been expressed, I am very supportive of small local business. And I think what they have offered in the last 10 years is it is a unique business. It adds to the character of the community. And I'd like to think that collectively we're creative enough to come up with something that will meet the requirements, and so that this kind of whimsical, untraditional business can continue.
I'd also like to add that if we do move forward in the future with an application where there's outdoor seating and gathering, I do have concerns, and I will have concern with every single application as it moves forward in the city, that if there's any outdoor seating, that I would support that as long as there's no permanent or seasonal coverage of that area that could be distracting or could otherwise disguise it from what a permanently enclosed space. If it's
Point well taken.
so.
So where are we going to find the parking? I mean, needs to be additional parking.
Well,
If we approve the seating, where's that going to come
we
from?
aren't approving anything tonight. We're allowing, certainly they've heard a concern about parking. I would hope that if the applicant comes back in a month with a new proposal or a clarified proposal, that they will address parking or lack of it, and we can either approve or deny it at that point.
I was under. Go ahead.
On the parking, I think some parking exception could be granted here. I think I'd have to think really hard about a complete exception for 25 seats. I would ask the applicant to think really hard about how they could reconfigure things and provide some more parking and really have an answer that says, I've exhausted everything. I think you're going to have to come up with some more parking somehow, because it's pretty obvious that sure, I know you've got great support from the motorcycle and bicycle community, because those are people that like your operation. I get it, you know, and I think that's terrific. However, there's going to be people driving in there, and I think potential conflict with the Safeway parking lot and the Safeway manager is something that the city and you want to avoid at all costs, and I think that's what could happen here if you don't have a bit more parking that will absorb those people moving in and out of there. Thank you.
Kelso.
Can we just discuss the outdoor parking, the requirements in the municipal code, and sort of what was the philosophy behind that? Because obviously in the municipal code, we don't need to park outdoor parking, correct?
Up to 30% of the indoor parking. So if you have...
So if there's no indoor parking, it's just sort of a nebulous area where it's up to the planning commission?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
We have a motion on the floor to continue this item. Is there any further discussion? I'm going to call for the vote then. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries 7-0 to continue this item to April 12th, date certain. So I trust that the applicant has an understanding of what you need to do for the next meeting. Thank you. Keep going. Okay. Let them clear the room. We cool? With that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. It's a public hearing of the application for a use permit and an exception from parking standards to allow the expansion of a hotel and restaurant, including an increase in restaurant seating. Project location is 29 East MacArthur Street. And with that, I will ask Mr. Jesselin to give us a staff report.
Thank you, Chair Felder and members of the commission. So first, I do want to clarify first that this is an application for a modification to an existing use permit, not a new use permit. With that, in terms of the property, this is a 5.1 acre site. It's located on the south side of East MacArthur Street, adjoining Broadway in the west, Nathanson Creek on the east. It's currently developed with the MacArthur Place Hotel and Spa, a 64-room hotel with special event and conference venue, restaurant, and spa. So the project for you this evening involves a variety of improvements. as follows. First, the existing barn building, which is Building P on the site plan that's up before you, would be remodeled and expanded to accommodate guest reception services. Those would be relocated from Building Q. A new coffee sundry shop, additional bar, and restaurant seating and associated kitchen facilities. The additional seating would be accommodated by full enclosure of an existing veranda seating area in conjunction with a new veranda deck with outdoor seating. So the project would increase the overall indoor dining and bar seating count from 86 to 132 indoor seats and would add 34 outdoor dining seats. The meeting rooms currently in this building would be relocated to Building Q. The additional floor area created by additions and enclosure of the existing veranda totals roughly 1,800 square feet. Secondly, the existing 2,880 square foot spa building, which is Building L on the site plan up on the screens, would be replaced with a larger 4,000 square foot spa building. The current number of treatment rooms would remain unchanged. However, the increased floor area would allow more comprehensive facilities to serve customers and hotel guests. Thirdly, the existing reception or library building, which is Building Q on the site plan, would be remodeled and expanded by roughly 1,500 square feet as the Knowledge Center to accommodate staff facilities and office and special event meeting rooms that are being relocated from Building P. The total number of meeting rooms and their occupancy would remain unchanged at 150 persons. The reception area currently housed in this building would be relocated to Building P. So you can see there's different uses that are being relocated between Building Q and P, and then a new replacement spa building, essentially. It's a little bit larger. Other improvements include replacing the swimming pool in conjunction with exterior pool trellises, pool bar, and cabanas. In addition, there's landscape and garden improvements proposed throughout. Lastly, a valet parking program would be implemented, increasing the overall capacity from 100 to 121 on-site parking spaces. The project would result in a net increase total of 3,944 square feet of floor area throughout the facility. And that's a correction from a different statistic that we had in the staff report. So in terms of the general plan and zoning, the property has a mixed-use zoning and general plan designation. In general, staff has found the proposal consistent with the applicable general plan policies that we listed in the report. And in terms of the development code, hotels, including related restaurants and accessory services, are a conditionally permitted use in the mixed-use zone, obviously. That would be subject to review and approval of a use permit by the Planning Commission. We would note that use permits were approved by the Planning Commission in 1997 and 1999 for the existing facility. The applicants are requesting a modification to the use permit to allow this proposed expansion and the improvements associated with it. In terms of development code consistency, the project complies with all of the basic zoning requirements, meaning setbacks, coverage, floor area ratio, and building height. And the amount of parking proposed, 121 spaces, roughly meets the overall parking requirement that staff calculated, though implementation of the valet parking program is necessary, and that guests and customers would not be able to self-park given how the parking areas would be reconfigured for the valet service. And we wanted to note that staff used the current parking standards to calculate the parking requirement for the project and facility. We included the allowable 50% reduction for all the secondary and accessory uses, and this is reflected in the table on page 4 of the staff report. We felt this is a very straightforward, albeit more conservative approach to evaluating parking for the project. And we felt it was supported by our code, specifically Section D of 19.48.040. That said, the applicant disagrees with staff's evaluation on this issue and has presented an alternate calculation they feel should apply. That's in the response letter that has been submitted to you. That ultimately would allow for the banking of 12 spaces or surplus parking spaces for future uses. So we anticipate questions and are prepared to delve into this issue deeper following the conclusion of the report. So another more minor issue related to the parking is just that some of the additional parking spaces for the arrival court are in proximity to East MacArthur Street. The minimum 5-foot separation is exceeded from the right-of-way, but we did include draft conditions requiring frontage landscaping in this area to screen vehicle and parking areas from the public right-of-way. Just in terms of general compatibility, this proposal obviously represents an intensification of the existing use. However, implementation of the proposed valet parking program would address any increased parking demand, and that would ensure that parking doesn't overflow or leak into the surrounding area. In addition, the site setting with the high school in the south, arterial collector roadways on the north and west, and the creek and park to the east inherently minimizes potential impacts and conflicts with other land uses in the vicinity, including residential land uses. And lastly, the design of the various improvements, including the landscaping, would also be subject to subsequent design review by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission. And the last item we just wanted to point out is the project will trigger the requirement for public frontage improvements, meaning the building permit valuation would be exceeding $40,000. And this provides an opportunity to obtain at least part of a traffic calming measure. This would be specific to the southeast corner of the intersection of East MacArthur Street and Broadway. David, can you bring up the that conceptual plan? It's going to be an attachment to the report, not in their material. You don't have that? Okay. It's in the staff report that you have, but accordingly, we have included a draft condition that would require, essentially, it's a bulb out at the south east corner of the intersection there, which is part of this project's frontage. And there possibly would include some crosswalk restriping. This would be generally consistent with the city's traffic calming and pedestrian improvement plan. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the use permit modification. It's subject to the conditions that we attached to the report, but it does appear that the concept of banking parking, ultimately after we discuss that item, needs to be addressed somehow through an amendment to the conditions, which doesn't really get into that issue. Thank you. That concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Rob. Questions?
Rob, I hate to flaunt my ignorance, but can you explain what banking space is, or do we have to wait for the applicant?
It just means that there would be, under the calculations provided by the applicant, 12 extra or additional parking spaces beyond what would be required would be available. So it just means there's 12 extra parking spaces on site. And that means that in the future, if there were, they could propose additional rooms or additional seating, different changes that would have an additional parking demand that those spaces could then meet. Of course, those changes would have to come back to you in terms of any future additional expansions or new facilities or rooms, et cetera.
Have those 12 spaces been identified?
They're not specifically identified. So these are just 12 of the proposed 121 that would be created through this application with the valet parking implementation.
But the attachment is part of the application. When they say proposed site plan, they have identified 121 spaces.
That's correct.
So there are 12 beyond the 121?
No, those include the 12. Those are.
So what I'm hearing then is that based on what's being presented, only 110 parking spaces are required, and they happen to have created 122, which means they're 12 over, which allows for some wiggle room down the road if they decide to do something?
In essence, yes. Okay. Yes, in essence.
Thank you.
I have I have a couple questions, and maybe you can give me clarification. I wasn't able to identify or really understand as part of the site plan where the loading and unloading and delivery of services is to take place and pickup of garbage. And I was looking at the prior conditions of approval through the other subsequent changes to the use permit, and there's been no language or clarification as to loading and unloading for this this use.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. I think those two items are actually addressed in the applicant's original project narrative. If I could look quickly through that. Yeah, so page 5, trash and recycling. Hotel will conform to recycling requirements, City of Sonoma. Recycling stage will take place in the receiving dock of the Knowledge Center. Trash and recycle storage enclosures will be located in the east lot. So that is the plan for trash and recycling. And also the loading, receiving dock, I guess it would be at the Knowledge Center. I'm sorry, did that answer your questions?
Well, I guess yes and no. I guess so. There, because I just got these the old conditions to look at. So the expansion and changes to this site is not changing the existing loading configurations or the way they handle their business right now.
Yeah, and actually on page 4, another delivery, receiving, and trash pickup. These functions will remain in the existing east lot parking lot. So
Okay.
the way that I'm reading this is that those would remain in their current locations unchanged.
And those are nowhere near where the valet is being proposed.
Where
So-
what's being proposed?
Where the valet parking is being proposed. It's the opposite.
I'm going to have to let the applicants respond to that
Okay.
when they.
And my other question actually really had to do with, in the application, there was no proposal for how the valet system was to operate, other than there's a valet system, like the hours of operation, whether or not the operator would charge clients or guest visitors, or was there any proposal that was submitted to staff that you reviewed and you felt it was satisfied that could be attached to the use permit and added as a condition, or is this something that our commission may have to discuss and vet?
Yes, it's only as described on the page 4 of their project narrative, so
Okay.
it didn't get into greater detail.
Let me
than that.
jump in, just to make sure that we're clear on parking. It's my understanding that it's 100% valet parking.
That's correct.
So there is no special area or hours or anything else. It's 100% all the time for whatever.
I think the
Right.
applicant may be able to
Okay.
answer some of these operational questions a little better. I believe the arrival court is where people would self-park to initiate the valet.
Right.
So there would be that aspect.
That's true.
Of the use.
And so I guess this answers my last question about designated employee parking. So if it's 100% valet, thanks for the clarification because I wasn't quite clear about that, that employees would then be dropping their cars off and they would be parked by somebody else?
We'll have to hear the applicants on that. There is, yeah.
And then my very last question to staff is the code enforcement issue and the building department issue with removal of sheds and storage and maintenance buildings that I guess were not originally approved as part of the site development permit. And I wanted to know if staff had talked to the operator to see if these modifications and changes and additions to floor area will now accommodate those needs, or whether or not that's still an ongoing issue. And so I'd like to know that, if you've been able to find that out, or.
Yeah, the applicants are well aware of the removal of the sheds being necessary, as well as merging the properties, and that's part of their program. And if you see in their latest, the response to staff report letter, they indicate how the existing storage occurring in the sheds is going to be accommodated in some of these expansion areas within the areas of addition for Building Q, I believe. So, yeah, it is addressed through the additions being proposed.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Great staff report. I have a few questions. My first one is, in the staff report, and I believe in the applicant's submittal, it says that it's currently an 86-seat restaurant, but I believe it was, at the last use permit, it was approved for 60 seats. So I'm wondering what happened.
Yeah, so I noticed that baseline too that's being used for in the applicant's parking calculations, and it might reflect back to when the building P, had the addition and veranda that was created in the 2003 approval. That additional seating was created there for the bar that didn't get counted, and that's reflected, I think, in the zoning verification letter that David sent to Suzanne Bragum that's provided this evening. And so I'm thinking, that could be the difference. I don't know if that was 26 bar seats, but that could be at least a portion of those. But otherwise, I would consider those 26 seats to have not been counted in the parking calculation.
So
But they're being counted now.
Yeah. In our calculation.
As part of the
Yeah.
132.
Yeah, correct.
All right, thank you. My next question is, how do you consider, because obviously this is an issue between staff's recommendation and the applicant's recommendation, sort of considering a use permit under a new parking standard? Like in 1999, we didn't require employee parking. In 1999, we also didn't do the 50% for other uses. I mean, it's just a completely different parking standard. And have you ever, as staff, encountered a situation like this where, the applicant is requesting a hybrid use, 1999 when it's good, 2018 when it's good?
Well, I'm going to call in my friend David on some of that question, but I think I wanted to start with a couple points that I noticed in reviewing the previous approvals and looking at parking more closely. And two things that I think have changed and are different from the olden days when these approvals occurred in 1997 and 1999. So 20 years ago. First, we have a different code that applies now. There was no employee parking requirement in the older code in these 1997 and 1999 approvals, so that's a major difference. But I think the other key difference is that those previous approvals indicate that the spa is going to be for guests only. And so it's specifically noted in the reports that there was no parking requirement given to the spa because of that. And we know now the way that functions currently in the hotel is that it's open to outside customers and walk-ins. And so from that perspective, that's a change that's outside of what was considered at those. So we would think that a parking requirement should be applied to those buildings, and it can be prorated 50% of the current. But those are the two biggest changes that I noticed. No staff parking requirement in the past, but also there was no consideration that outside guests could use the spa facilities. And David, maybe you can follow up on the other end.
Well, this does come up from time to time, and in a situation like this, I think that there are some gray areas that are subject to interpretation on the part of the Planning Commission. And when Rob and I discussed this, it seemed to us that the most significant area of interpretation might have to do with the issue of the requirement for employee parking that's in the current development code that was not in place at the time this use permit was first approved. Because when we're applying these new standards to this current proposal, that's based on language in the development code that says if you're changing a use or expanding a building, you apply the new standard. But they're not changing the use of their hotel rooms, and they're not expanding their hotel rooms. So you could make an argument that that element could be segregated from the application of the updated parking requirements. That seemed to us to be kind of the area that was, most amenable to interpretation on the part of the Planning Commission. But that, again, we took a conservative approach in applying the parking standards in this staff report.
Okay, thank you. And then I have just a couple more questions. First of all, I do hope spa is open to outside guests, because I got my sister for Christmas a spa package there, and she won't be staying there. Is there anything in the municipal code about valet parking? I mean, I know that came up as sort of a controversy during that Williams-Sonoma hearing, and I don't remember the specifics, but I assume it's allowed, but is there any sort of language about valet?
There's nothing about operational requirements associated with valet parking. It's just that here are some extra parking spaces. They only work because of valet. So you do need, when you're reviewing that kind of proposal, to look at the operational requirements and make sure that, they're there, because the code doesn't really get into that.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Questions?
How do you evaluate the efficiency of valet parking? What's the formula?
Well, it's just the number of spaces. I mean, you can count the number of spaces that are made available by virtue of the fact that they're operating it as a valet parking service. So
You mean physically designated as valet parking spaces?
Right.
Okay. But there's no way to say, I mean, we just accept the fact that they are spaces, period, useful.
Well,
They're circulated in and out all the time,
all right.
obviously.
Well, there's a couple of things. First, I mean, we have to look at the spaces in terms of their functionality, even with respect to valet parking. But these spaces that, many of these spaces that are being made available are only functional because they're being made available through valet parking. But they are functional spaces.
It might be tandem or something like that.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Or they block other spaces.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, exactly, tandem spaces. So, but you can count them and you can look at them and you can see where they are. So there is a number there. It's not just, it's valet, so it's going to work. You can see the spaces on the site plan, and you can, and we evaluate them in terms of whether or not we feel that even in a valet mode that they are, adequate and reasonably accessible.
Okay. I just kind of make an assumption, if it's very, very crowded and they can't find a valet space and it goes on the street probably, perhaps you can make that assumption, maybe you're not, I don't know. Maybe
Well,
that's...
To go off that point, I mean, it's sort of a similar question I had. And that's sort of why I asked if there's anything about valet in the municipal code, because we sort of apply this 50% metric using an assumption that 50% of the hotel guests are going to be at the restaurant and the spa, et cetera. There's also, I think, an assumption that not 100% of the people are going to valet park. And especially at this location, you'll drive up, you'll see there's a valet, you'll go park in the neighborhood and just walk in. Or at least that's how I generally approach valet parking. And so I'm wondering if there is sort of a similar metric we should apply to valet parking, because the actual reality of the situation is not everyone's going to valet park.
Well, I guess that I would, just personally looking at it, one suggestion I would have would be to just verify that if I'm going to the restaurant to eat and I'm not a guest of the hotel, that I can park for free. And that is a required element of the plan. Otherwise, maybe I would be more inclined to park on the street. But if I can park for free, it seems equally convenient, if not more so, to use valet parking than to park in the parking lot.
Sometimes people don't want to give away their cars. I mean, there's a...
Microphone?
Yeah.
In any event, that's just how I would answer that question, but it's a point for commission discussion.
I had a question about, Rob, about the site plan and the parking. Are we looking at 100 parking spaces? How many parking spaces are actually in that drawing?
121.
120, okay. I was under maybe the misassumption that the western parking was limited to hotel guests. What's the truth of that or not, and what's the flow over there versus over to the more public spaces on the east, as far as parking? Choices that drivers would make.
There's no choice.
Well, I believe there wouldn't be any choice by drivers because both the east and the west lot would be under the valet parking program. So
Oh, like
people-
100%.
Yeah, so
Okay, all
just use as needed.
Okay, that makes it work. Thanks.
Further questions? Go ahead.
Okay. I'm completely confused about the parking issue, okay? So how many of the spaces will actually be valet parking spaces versus open to the public to drive into and park their car?
I believe only spaces in the arrival court would not be for valet service, because that's where people have to come in
Okay.
and essentially get the valet service.
Okay,
I believe
so-
that the applicants can probably answer that better
Well,
than I.
I visited there this afternoon because I haven't been in the interior of the site before. And I met briefly with the applicant, who kind of walked me to the places where the changes are going to be made. And my car was valet parked, and I asked, when he said that he would do that, and he said that there was no fee. Do you know what the fee is going to be for valet parking?
I don't.
I think that's a huge deal. That's a huge deal, because he did not, he said that there was no fee for it, and I think that that's pretty much what I find. It isn't about giving up your car, it's about how much you have to pay to just sit down and have brunch or something. I think that's the real issue here, and if all the spaces are to be valet parked, I think that's what I would be looking from a standpoint of how it's going to be used. It's just what costs is there going to be.
And the applicants can address that question.
Okay.
Linda?
Which triggered a real quick question. So the valet parking is going to be part of the use permit, and so that's going to follow the land, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
And I have one last question. It's maybe because there was so much to absorb and read for this public hearing. Some of it we're not hearing tonight. But I also had a question about either it's in the applicant's description or something that the city staff or the planning commission could possibly potentially require, is we've looked at other uses in the past that required certain standards for employees to encourage carpooling, to encourage bicycles, to do a number of things and incentives as such. We have looked at new hotel proposals and environmental reviews that have required that by the city. And maybe I looked through the conditions of approval and I didn't see anything like that. Is this something that's in the project description that I overlooked, or is it something that our commission, has the ability to require?
Well, absolutely, with respect to bicycle parking, the planning commission does have the authority over that. They are proposing bicycle parking and bicycle availability that's presented in their initial project description. I think that's probably focused more for guests than
yes.
employees, but that is something that, of course, the planning commission could require, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, we're going to open up the public hearing and ask the applicant to approach.
Good evening. My name is Michael Ross, architect for MacArthur Place. With your permission, I'd like to make a brief presentation of the project.
You have it.
See if we get a signal. There it is. I'd like to start this presentation and let you know that valet parking is free. Just to get that put aside. But really, it's a pleasure to be here, and tonight also attending this presentation is Mr. Joe Walsh, who's the Vice President of Development for IMH, the new owners of MacArthur Place. And also attending is Josh Bevan from Page and Turnbull, Historic Resource Consultants, and George Gervin, the hotel's landscape architect. And they're available to respond to questions. Now, for some reason, this thing is, let's go back. Well, this project builds on a 20-year legacy that was originated by Suzanne Brangham, and she and her team were excellent stewards of this property and the land that it's on. And it's the new owner's ambition to continue that tradition and enhance, refresh, remodel, and improve the guest serving and Sonoma resident serving features of the property. And what we have tonight is really before you a modification of an existing use that's been tested for 20 years. This isn't like a parking standard, which is a Target or something like that. This is really something that's been load tested, and not only by the operations itself, but the neighborhood. And I happen to live in that neighborhood, and I really believe that MacArthur Place is a great neighbor. Okay? What it is, it's 20 agrarian buildings in a garden landscape, and the garden campus is a big feature of this property, and it's going to be part of the continuum that brings it forward. It's important to note when we talk about additions that the number of guest rooms, spa treatment rooms, and meeting rooms remain unchanged. The capacity remains unchanged. That there's going to be renovations and additions to the barn, spa, and reception buildings, but those additions really are basically associated with, excepting for enclosure of the veranda restaurant, with ancillary support spaces that carry with it no increased guest or staff loads. It's ancillary spaces like private restrooms for the staff in the kitchen so they don't have to use the public restrooms in the lobby. Public restrooms by the pool so people can get out of the pool and use a restroom. There is no staff associated with that. And so these are basically very simple insertions into an existing fabric of a garden campus that we're proposing here. This is not a large-scale change to an ongoing use. One of the things that we're going to do is relocate the guest reception to the barn. And why is that? Is because your natural desire when you approach this property is actually to go into the barn to register. And as compared to now, off to the side, there's the reception building. What we intend to do is really to create a major social gathering spot in the barn because it's the primary aspect of the building, and we believe it should be the front door and the greeter of guests. And in so doing, where do we put the meeting rooms? Well, we're proposing to put the meeting rooms next door. And we're going to do that by filling in the exterior courtyard that separates the current reception lobby, then there's the exterior courtyard, and the library. There'll be this covered pavilion, and there'll be 3 reception rooms that are all linked together, separated by movable acoustic partitions. And importantly, one of the objectives, and which Page and Turnbull really helped us with, was to uncover the Burris House. The Burris House is the historic building which was constructed in 1869, and right now it's basically screened significantly by existing landscaping and hedges and things like that. And we really believe it's a good thing to do to re-engage it with East MacArthur Street, re-engage it visually with the history of the area, so when people go by, they see that the Burris House is really part of our historical fabric and legacy. And what we're going to do also is, before I change, you can see the gate right there. This is just a simplified conceptual design that doesn't include the formal landscape design overlay. What we're going to do is create the primary pedestrian entry to the site is going to be right in front of the historic Burris House. So we're going to reinstate the Burris Gate. And so when pedestrians arrive on the scene, they'll go past the historic house, go to the barn, you can see it in the background there, and go to the, what is now going to be called the Knowledge Center, which is the meeting room space. The current site plan, which Rob and David presented to you, is basically around 54,000 square feet, and once you remove the spa building and replace it, we are going to be basically increasing the overall building area by 7.3% increase in building area, and that's going to be offset by a 21% increase in the parking capacity. And our analysis and what we proposed in the response letter, and thank you, Rob, for circulating that, I really appreciate it, is basically we believe that most of these changes are not associated with great increases in either guest using or staff increases, and that they're virtually parking neutral, excepting some things that I'll speak about in just a moment. Well, one of the things about the new space of 4,000 square feet that we're going to add to the building, part of this is ironic because 1,300 square feet of the new space already exists. It is already constructed. It is the Veranda Restaurant, and if you've ever dined there on a cool day, you know how reasonable it is to enclose it and put in an HVAC system. And so the moment we do that, automatically, almost like magic, the seats that are in there now that are outdoor seats become indoor seats, and that triggers the parking requirement. And so this, the building that you see here right now, which was really tastefully done, designed by Suzanne and her team in the past, is now going to become indoor dining, and that's why we're adding the 46 seats, and we're also counting it as new space, but in terms of overall footprint, it already exists. So this is the west parking lot plan, and now I'm going to speak to the whole notion of valet parking. Valet parking is free. Staff will park themselves, and all guests will arrive in the arrival court, and long-duration parking will likely go into the west parking lot because that's where we are going to double-stack cars and shift them around. You can see that the parking lot has actually been widened. It's one of the few double-loaded parking lots in Sonoma that has excess space that can expand a little bit. And in so doing, we are able to provide a dedicated fire lane and a emergency vehicle turnaround in the corner there, a 35-foot clear that we worked closely with our fire marshal. And currently that turnaround doesn't exist, and this is going to greatly improve fire truck access into that lot. On the east side, parking areas are going to be reconfigured, but still stay behind the creekside setback, and it's going to be restriped, and that would be for shorter duration parking. And so when you go up to the restaurant, the valet would receive you at the arrival court. You would go in, get your check, and the car would be parked for you and be waiting for you when you return. And so the difference between short duration and long duration parking is going to be handled by the two various lots. So what we're proposing, and we hope that you approve, is a different way of counting the spaces and using the original use permit, the 99 space requirement as the baseline, that we would propose adding on the spaces using the 50% reduction factor that's already been described in the development code and in the staff report, that when you add 46 dining seats, you get 6 spaces. When you add the spa area accessory use increase, that's at 1 per 300. And the support space next to the barn commercial kitchen, that would be a total increase of 10 spaces that would be officially counted or assigned as a use, and then hence there would be 12 banked spaces for future flexibility. And what is future flexibility in the hospitality world? Because the changing nature of the business, maybe they need an extra spa treatment room, or they have a big Easter brunch or something like that they need to have some spaces, that those spaces would be banked for their use without having come back to the city, even though I realized a spa treatment room would require that. But it would be available for them to come back with the confidence knowing that there is some additional space that they could call on. Now, what you'll hear tonight, I believe, from some of the people who've operated the hotel, including Bill Blum, who was the manager there very successfully for 18 years, he will be able to talk about patterns of use and was the hotel underparked? Was there not enough spaces? And I think that we should really approach this from a common sense, reality base. How did this operation work in the past? And right now, what we're going to essentially do is maintain the existing use, but add 21 spaces that never existed there before. So with that, I want to thank you for this opportunity to present. And these are the asks of you, and I hope that you, with your careful consideration, will approve them. That we're proposing to enclose the veranda and add 46 indoor seats, replace the spa, add approximately around 4,000 square feet. There'll become 132 indoor seats total, and that's spread between the bar, the dining room, the private dining room, everything on the inside. Add the 34 outdoor seats, which is 25% of the indoor. And this is something that I'd like you to consider, is that should you approve this, that the seat total is an aggregate total, and allow the operation to relocate some of those seats. For example, if you have a total of 166 seats between the indoor and outdoor, that on a nice day that maybe more seats can go outside from the inside and they're not frozen in there. And there wasn't an approval, I know of another project where that was considered and approved by the Planning Commission a couple of years ago. And then lastly, implement the valet parking program, add 21 valet spaces, 109 spaces become the baseline, and then allow the hotel to have 12 spaces unassigned. So that's my presentation, and I'm available to respond to any types of questions, and I want to thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Michael. Do we want to ask any questions of Michael, or are we going to wait for, go ahead.
May I ask a
Sure.
question? Pardon me. You say that you're going to implement the valet parking program, and that says to me that it's like, I know you have it now because I was there today, but what does that mean in terms of long-term? Is there a condition of approval, and perhaps it should be better asked of the staff, but is there a condition that requires that you have a valet parking program?
I believe that in order to have 121 spaces, you must have a valet parking program. Otherwise, this wouldn't hold water.
Well, that's my point. And so is it going to be a free valet parking program? You say it is now, but in the future, with a new owner, for example, would it still be a free valet parking program?
Excellent question. I can't answer it. But what I know right now, but Joe Walsh, Mr. Walsh will be at the microphone in just a moment. He can answer it specifically. I've been told that it's going to be 100% free valet parking program and to design accordingly.
And conditioned in that manner?
I haven't been instructed to create any conditions of approval relative to that, just to design a 121 space valet parking program that's completely free.
Yes, you said earlier that sort of keep it how it is, basically, in terms of the present use permit and just add what's added. And so staff, where does staff park currently?
A combination, I believe, on the lots, and I believe some staff have been parking on the city streets.
And going forward, they will not be parking on-site.
That's my understanding. They're going to be parking on-site. That's one of the reasons why we're adding more parking spaces. Now, speaking to bicycles and transportation.
Wait, I'm sorry. They're going to be parking on-site, staff?
We're adding these spaces so staff, we want to put all the staff parking on-site.
Currently, or I mean in the projected.
Yeah, that's why we're adding these spaces, to help do that. But the staff will not be valet parked, they'll self-park. So
are they taking the banked spaces?
The bank spaces are just blurred across the site.
Oh,
It's just they haven't been assigned, that's all. They haven't been assigned as a baseline parking requirement. We're suggesting that the baseline be held at 109, and that...
Well, that's what I was asking, because in the staff parking requirements, I assume they're parked on site, but you asked to keep it as it is, which eliminated that requirement to park employee, to account for employee parking, and so...
It's the goal to have all the employee parking to be on-site if possible.
Okay.
Okay? But I didn't answer your question. There's a bus stop right opposite Sonoma Truck and Auto, and I know that the ownership group is very interested in encouraging their staff to use mass transit as well as bicycles, and we would be willing to create staff bicycle parking areas specific to them as well.
If I could just interrupt, I guess also my comment had to do with the owners actually help subsidizing public transportation and paying for public transportation for their employees so they're not using cars. So, but we can talk about that later.
Please address that one to Joe or Bill.
Okay. Could I ask just a few questions that you might be able to answer? I have a question about the operations of the spa and the restaurant itself. We're looking at increasing the square footage of both. And I'm assuming that these are going to be operated and facilitated by the hotel, that the restaurant would not become, say, for example, a French Laundry that would operate independently and would be a standalone destination restaurant. The restaurant really continues to function as a larger space serving the hotel and to some extent the community. And that would be true with the spa. So I just clarifying, what is the business plan for the ultimate operator of the restaurant and the spa?
Yes, let's, Joe Walsh, who the Vice President of Development for the hotel, really understands the operations. I would like Joe to respond to those types of questions. Is that okay? Yeah.
And you were talking about the valet parking. The site also has, and I wanted to pick this with you, is that parking spaces 31 through 38 on the site plan look like they have the opportunity to actually have parking in front of them to provide additional valet parking. And if you take a look at the roundabout, that there might be some ability to provide additional parking. Is it because there's a handicap parking space there, or I guess I'm looking at it a little bit differently because the illustrative that you provide for the proposed site plan looks a little bit different than this. So this looks tighter that we're looking at, but if you look at the site plan.
Well, right now, yes, there's a number of iterations of site plans. The site plan that's governed right now is the one that's being developed by Adobe Associates, or civil engineers that take into account not only the parking and all the standards, but also stormwater retention and filtration. And so what you see on the screen right now is the design concept that is basically the underpinning of all of this. And the way that the arrival court will work is that when you arrive, drop off your car, There will be an accessible space there that you can park while you come in and touch base and things like that. But the rest of the accessible spaces and everything will also be managed by the valet service.
Oh, interesting.
So people can get off. If you're a wheelchair user or things like that, you can get off and enter the hotel, and then your car will be parked. But just as a belt and suspenders approach, we are providing accessible spaces per code throughout the site.
Right. In my last question, that maybe you can point out to the commission the 34 outdoor the 34 outdoors seating, uncovered seating area on the site plan.
Let's see what we can do here. I believe that on this, it's difficult to see, but on the south side of the barn, it says veranda.
Veranda.
That is a brand-new raised deck that oversees that south lawn between the barn and the high school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we are proposing to have the 34 seats. And if they're not all located there, they will also drop down to the south lawn, and that will be an outdoor seating area in good weather.
Okay, so I guess you hit on that a little bit during good weather. I have personally, as a commissioner, to have proposals for outdoor seating and then find that they become tents for the whole year and when there's inclement weather. And so I just was wondering if that's something that you would do as part of your operations on site, or would you go with the more traditional approach and say that area is closed until we have good weather? In terms of like if there's a wedding or something like that, and it's like, well, we can do a wedding in February, we just put tents up.
Right.
So I was just wondering,
my office is right next to Snow and Mission Inn that has basically a large meeting room under a tent that's been there for, 15 years?
Exactly.
And so I understand, in a way, it's a workaround, a use permit issue. And so let's have Joe respond to that. It's not my intent to clutter this place with a bunch of tents that are there in perpetuity.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Joe Walsh. I'm a resident of Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm the Vice President of Development for the new owner of MacArthur Place. Our company is IMH Financial Corp., and we acquired the hotel in October, and we've been working diligently on our design plans, and I can answer some of the questions. My two requests on the conditions of approval the letter was penned by Michael, but we did believe that in our development with the valet parking plan, as well as the increase in the number of spaces, that we came up with more parking spaces than the property needs or will need under our development. And the reason we did that was we're in design of the spa. We've completed the design of the barn and the knowledge center. But we want maximum flexibility, not knowing what we're going to find in future hotel trends, not having completed the full design of the spa. So we were hoping to invest the money now to complete all of the parking spaces. The valet parking is intended to be free. We're a hotel developer and a hotel manager. We have a 25-year agreement to manage the hotel. And free valet parking is sort of our mantra as how we want to operate the hotel. The second comment on the conditions of approval, which I think staff's report was very well done, and we respectfully request the two amendments, the one being the parking, and we believe we have 12 additional spaces than what is required, but we'd like to build them now. And the second one Michael spoke to, which was the outdoor dining. The aggregate number of seats that are in the report we're in total agreement with, but we want the flexibility for the indoor-outdoor dining. And back to your question, of course we wouldn't want to put a temporary tent. The veranda area is designed to work during the 4 months or 5 months a year where it'll be great to dine outside. There'll be trees, a graded area with nice landscape, so that on a beautiful day, our total number of seating might all be on the deck and dining would be outside. But in inclement weather, we would live with the required number of seats would be on the inside. And then to speak to Michael's summary, Building department, building official was very frank with us up front. There are some storage sheds on the property that, as hotels mature, they gather stuff. So the storage sheds, they explained to us that those would be replaced, and we built that into the design. So much of the expansion of the Knowledge Center really is to incorporate the required storage. And then the expansion of the barn, our calculations of the required food service storage required us to add additional space there. And then, as Michael explained, on the spa, our calculations of the fixture count required in 2018 under California Building Code for the spa, the number of restrooms, it's going to be larger than the current building. But to be honest, we haven't completed the design, so we made the estimation that it would be approximately 4,000 square feet. And then to speak to your questions, sir, the deliveries will all go through the current area, which is the barn building P. There will be a receiving office, so the intention is that on the far east side of the lot, that's where all of the deliveries will be received. And then the valet parking has just recently been implemented. The operations team has, I think, been doing that for about 1 month, and that's the consistent plan that we'll have in the future. And it's not, the implementation of valet parking isn't part of the development plan on parking spaces. It's the customer service and the way that we want to operate the hotel. Are there any other questions that I can answer?
On the 50% assumption, do you have any hard data that can show how many of the guests use the facilities versus people from the local community that come in? Do you have data that supports the 50%?
I've been involved with the project since October. I think in this room we have Bill Bloom has been the operator and the general manager for 18 years and is now working with us as a consultant. Suzanne, who is the original developer, might be able to better answer that. But I know the project has been operating for over 20 years with 100 parking spaces, and our improvements are adding to 121, or about a 21% increase in parking. And really, what are we adding? We are basically making the kitchen larger to meet code. We're making the Knowledge Center larger to meet code, we were told by the building department. The spa will be replaced to meet current market standards, and we're conditioning a room that's been existing for 20 years. So I haven't observed parking issues being there, but I think others could speak better to that point.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Would anyone else from the
actually-
public? Go ahead.
I have a question, and it sort of follows up Commissioner Corrado's question in terms of this 50% assumption on the parking is something that the Planning Commission is allowed to do, but it's not, and it's sort of based on this concept that 50% of the restaurant patrons and the spa patrons, et cetera, are from the hotel. And so would you say, if there are people here with experience, that 50% of the patrons at Saddles are from town or from the hotel, or?
I don't know the answer, but perhaps Mr. Bloom, would you like to speak?
Hello, Bill Bloom. We've never actually done an exact study, but I would say it's at least 50% of the guests that come in at the spa are hotel guests, and the restaurant, I would say, is about half and half. And the meetings are probably 90% of our in-house guests who are having meetings on site too.
So the restaurant question, that's the one that troubles me the most, because I could see where spa and conference are primarily hotel guests, but if you're saying right now they're 50-50 and you're going to double the size of the restaurant, but you're not doubling the number of hotel rooms, how can we continue to use that ratio?
I don't really believe we're doubling the size of the restaurant. We're just mostly just enclosing the existing veranda seating, which triggers takes it from outdoor space.
So it's 86 seats plus, so how many seats are there currently? Just veranda plus?
I'd have to Joe speak to the number
Okay.
of seats.
So the Veranda Restaurant, the oddity is when Michael showed the picture, the Veranda Restaurant has been existing since 1999. There are 46 seats in that area. The fact that we're adding air conditioning triggers that to be indoor seating, but for all intent and purposes, it's been mildly conditioned indoor seating for 20 years. So
So
we're
the
adding.
46 seats is not part of the 86?
The 46 seats currently, I don't know how it is listed, but we're basically conditioning the 46 seats.
So you currently have 132 seats, indoor and outdoor?
I believe that's approximately correct.
And I have a question about
Yes, sir.
also operations. Maybe you or Bill can answer this. There's conferences and there's hotel guests and there's patrons of the restaurant and bar and spa. But in terms of other events such as weddings, I know weddings exist there. I know that it's a venue, a wedding venue. So my question would be, and we're talking about parking, the continuation of a wedding venue doesn't necessarily necessitate that all the people that are actually attending the wedding or that event are actually even staying at the hotel. So my question would be, what percentage of your business caters to that, and in the future, is this something that you want to expand or highlight, especially with the upgrades to the restaurant and the bars and the outdoor seating?
I think it's fair to say that a big positioning for MacArthur Place has been and will be a mix between midweek corporate business and weekend social business. The social business is a blend of folks visiting wine country as well as weddings. I believe the current operations, weddings probably happen a little less at the property. With our capital investment in that, I would think that there might be a growth in weddings. Definitely, we'd want to have the wedding attendees renting rooms from us and enjoying the restaurant and enjoying the bar. So a big part of the focus for weddings, which I believe are currently, or any social is capped at 150, which I think the meeting room in the future would hold 110, so 150 would be a large amount. I would think, our focus is to have the weddings that are destination, where we have the travelers staying with us and renting the rooms.
So I guess what you're saying is that regardless of whether it's a conference or a wedding, you treat the space either or can you have a conference and a wedding together, combined? Or I guess that's more of an operational issue.
It's a pretty small facility. There's 64 total rooms, and 80% of the profit on a resort like MacArthur Place comes from the room. So the primary focus is achieving an aggressive average daily rate and achieving a good occupancy. The meeting space is an accommodation to do that.
Okay. And I bring this up only because I operate a vacation rental, 2 vacation rentals in the city of Sonoma, and I only have my own personal experience where people are staying at my businesses, but they're attending weddings at the lodge. And so they are getting in their car and they're driving to the facility. So I'm just trying to understand how, if there is, are there weddings like at the lodge has a different type of setup, and they have a larger parking lot, and they maybe are marketing themselves differently the way than you guys are right now. So I just didn't know if there'd be any change to that.
The amount of meeting space or social space that currently exists at MacArthur Place is equal to what we are planning. We're just moving it. So the current meeting space is in the barn building as you walk in to the right. What we're putting in the Knowledge Center, in essence, is the exact same amount. We're not asking to change the 150 cap. I think by my observations, you could probably have you couldn't have a wedding that large. So we're not asking for that. And I don't know the meeting space capacity at the other hotel, so I couldn't speak to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You may have already answered this question, so excuse me, but the additional 46 seats, that were they're in a structure that had a roof on it but no sides? Is that because I don't know the area well.
The veranda dining room, as you walk into, for those that have been there, as you walk into the barn, just past the hostess stand to the right is a room that's been existing since 1999. I did not know that it wasn't an indoor area until we started the development. So basically, it is a vaulted ceiling, very nice area, but it just was never listed. It was never built as an indoor area, so it's more of an enclosed patio today. We're going to condition it and build a deck off the back, and the fact that we're doing that technical change, it changes it to indoor restaurant for all.
So was it all year-round use prior to the conditioning of it?
I know that I've seen meetings in there during, but I couldn't speak to it, not knowing, but I see that customers are in there regularly, but I know when it's really chilly, it's customers with coats or they're putting them somewhere else.
So it just wasn't conditioned, it had walls and so forth, though?
Still does, yes, sir.
Okay, so that's your position is that that's really just a kind of a transparent change from, they were seats before, they're seats now, so they're not incremental seats. Is that the idea?
Yes, sir. I mean, we're adding 33 outdoor seats. There's some change to seating. We're adding to the buildings
Right.
to meet code, and we're increasing the parking by 21%.
So the 34 incremental outdoors were a result of getting the 25% credit from the total? That don't require extra parking? They don't require parking for those outdoor seats?
Is that, yeah, he's telling me that's
Is
a
that
yes,
accurate?
and I'm sorry I
Okay.
can't answer that.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much. I
You're welcome,
understand.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So would anybody else from the public care to speak?
Hello, my name is Josh Bevan. I work with Page & Turnbull. We're an architectural firm in San Francisco specializing in research, planning, and design consultation for historic buildings and structures. And we've had a chance to review the use permit application, and we found that it's consistent with the HRE that we prepared for Ross Rulis Cusenberry a few months back. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you may have them regarding historic structures on the site. So, thank you.
Any questions?
I guess this would be maybe directed to staff. Would the modifications and changes to any buildings that may be historic be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission and Design Review? Would they be focusing on that more so than us?
All of the exterior modifications proposed under this use permit application would go through a subsequent design review by the Historic Preservation Commission.
Okay.
But the finding of Page & Turnbull's work is that the conceptual plans being presented tonight don't raise any issues in terms of consistency with applicable standards or adversely affecting any historic resources.
And it's our commission that has to make that finding, not the Design Review Commission, or the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission.
You'd be making, yes, you would need to be making a finding tonight that there is no adverse impact to historic resources, and that's borne out by the data supported by Page & Turnbull.
Okay, thank you.
Carol?
I have a question for staff. Okay, because I'm still confused about the parking issue. I recognize that it's currently valet. It's all going to be valet parking. Is it, however, conditioned that, say, in the future, any future owner or this particular owner would be required to provide valet parking for free?
Staff did include in the draft conditions under 3E, a requirement requiring essentially the valet parking program be implemented on a full-time ongoing basis, providing the total of 121 on-site parking spaces. So it's essentially listing what the applicants have already indicated with respect to how they'd be operating it,
But it doesn't
except
say-
for a fee.
yeah.
And so if that's where you guys wanted to go, that would need to be added in.
I get it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's George Gervin. I'm the landscape architect
on the resort. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. I think one of the things that we're really excited about is really bringing back the gardens. I think the property is a wonderful campus. I think that we've had that arborist report. We're looking at all the trees. We're going to be removing some that are diseased or that have been mismanaged in terms of pruning and grading. We're going to be adding quite a bit of landscape around the cottages, creating more of a garden cottage environment. I think one of the things that was asked, the area south of the barn, which is an area that's presently in lawn that is used flexibly. We're looking at that as an outdoor flexible space. There was a question about would that end up having a tent? No, because there's going to be a bosque of trees that are going to be planted there to provide outdoor eating area in the shade. We found that in the valley, people really like to be able to eat outside, but they need shade, and rather than having structures or umbrellas or tents, we find that good deciduous trees like mulberries are very, very successful providing that kind of an outdoor space, which would eliminate putting any kind of a tent over the top of it. Provides for a nice use for that area. The other thing is that right now it's a lawn, and so one of the things we're doing as we analyze the property, as you know, that the requirement with WELO for water calculations in California requires you to really kind of assess property and make sure that you're adequately meeting the requirements for water use and irrigation sustainability. So part of our job is going to be really looking at the overall landscape and the planting, and then implementing, as Michael has mentioned, the Burris House, opening the garden up to the street, really creating a vision for the community to the historic house, creating some sense of entries into many of the bungalows and cottages on the property, as well as working on a new pool and spa area that will provide really a center for activity within the project. Be happy to answer any questions relating to the landscape development, site development on the project, if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Other people care to speak?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Christine Batten. I recently moved to Sonoma about 8 months ago, and my home is 3 houses away from MacArthur Place. And so I just wanted to let you know that I and my neighbors are very concerned about this parking issue. And I'm actually happy to hear some of the things that I've heard tonight. But what it occurs to me is that it's only going to work, the parking, if we have free valet parking, and that's kind of a requirement. And I would hope it's just not going to work unless that's the case. Clearly, people are not going to want to valet park if they have to pay for it, and they're going to be parking in front of my house. I'm not happy about that. So I would ask that this be a condition of your accepting the proposal, that it be free valet parking, and that if at any time the management plans to change that policy, that they need to come back to you and ask for permission to do so. I'm struck by something that was said here, that our intention is to have it be free valet parking. I don't like that. You know, it needs to be, this is the way it will be, and it will be this way in perpetuity, and we don't see, you know, any thought for changing that. And I hope that you would make it be a requirement that if they want to change that they come back and ask.
Would you state it just for a minute? We have a question from a commissioner.
I've noticed parking on the street in the area, driving through there periodically. What is your assessment of the parking on the street in your neighborhood that comes from this project in the recent past?
I'm smiling because I'm renovating the house that I'm moving into, and a lot of the parking that's on the street right now is my problem, my responsibility, my landscapers and my builders. But I do know from talking to my neighbors that we know that the employees currently park along MacArthur Boulevard or MacArthur Street. And that at times, when there have been things like weddings and larger functions, that parking has spilled down into Austin Avenue, which is my street. So the fact that the employees will now be parking on site is definitely a good thing. But it occurred to me that if we're only adding 12 parking spaces, how many employees are there? And do we not negate those 12 spaces by having the employees in them? We do know, though, that they have been parking out on MacArthur. So.
Thank you.
Tricia Cullinan. It's not a criticism of the site, but I was curious about the parking issue because, unfortunately, I didn't count the employee parking on MacArthur, but it's substantial, 15, 20 people, same cars every day. I have to go by there, I walk by there, I drive by there for different reasons. So, and I also heard that Adobe Associates, Michael Ross said that Adobe Associates, I believe it was him, are working on some of the engineering that they have to catch the water on site from. There's a lot of hardscaping, there's a lot of buildings and retention ponds. So I'm curious how much of the parking is going to be eaten up by that, or if it's all going to be in the landscaping. But the reason I'm curious about the parking is Sonoma Auto will come before you at the special meeting on the 22nd, and the intensity of the use there is going to put more pressure on the parking. It's just a comment. It's not a comment on this project, but I'm always interested in how parking is handled and the cumulative effects of parking in Sonoma. Thank you.
Good evening, Bill Hooper, 144 West Napa Street. I would just point out that the cars parked on MacArthur are not entirely that hotel's employees. You have homes with small garages. We're all guilty of using those garages to store junk. So if you take a look at what that street looks like after the restaurant's closed, perhaps on a slow Monday when the hotel is at a low occupancy, and there's very few employees on site, you'll see that there are still a lot of cars parked on MacArthur that probably belong to the residents. So not all cars that you see on MacArthur belong to that hotel. Thank you.
Well, my name is Tom Thornley. I'm going to disappoint everybody because I'm not going to talk about parking. I live at 716 2nd Street East, 2 blocks from MacArthur Place. 18 years ago, or 19 years ago, really, my construction company had the privilege of working with Suzanne Brangham, Jack Lundgren, and the architect, Ivan Lukrich, to build and fulfill a vision that Suzanne had of saving and restoring the historic Burris House, the spa building, the horse barn, and the beautiful grounds. And in that process, building a first-class resort that would be woven seamlessly into the existing historic property and the fabric of the town of Sonoma. I think most of us in the room tonight would agree we succeeded at that. Here we all are 19 years later, and like MacArthur Place, we're all 19 years older. All of us still believe in this project and want to make it clear that we see it as a real opportunity to breathe some vitality into this iconic piece of Sonoma history
without compromising Suzanne's dream, but instead taking it to another level. And then I wanted to end my comments with, I think it's a very relevant quote that showed up on NPR yesterday. Yesterday, the Pritzker Prize was given out. This is the most prestigious prize given out in the world of architecture. People like I.M. Pei have won it. Frank Gehry has won it. Some very outstanding architects. Well, this year, the surprise winner, announced yesterday, is from India. He's 90 years old, and his name is Balkrishna Doshi. And I wanted to quote Mr. Doshi from his NPR interview yesterday. Architecture is not a static building. It's a living organism. And his question was, how can we bring life into what we create? With that in mind, please don't let MacArthur Place become a collection of static buildings. Change is good. It is a living organism. And this project before you tonight will bring life into what we all have created. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak?
How could I not?
I know.
MacArthur Place, Suzanne Brigham. MacArthur Place was a 10-year venture that lasted 20 years. And there wasn't one year that I didn't love being there, and that's why I doubled its existence. I have seen the plans that IMH has presented, and I'm really excited about it. And because the establishment now is 20 years old, the cottages we built are holding up beautifully. They are not adding any new rooms, which I thought they might be trying to do, but they're not. The locals love the restaurant and the bar, and the bar doesn't suffice, and the plans that I saw that they were doing are really quite extraordinary. Guests oftentimes walked into the barn carrying their luggage, wheeling their luggage, thinking that was the main entry. So I am thrilled that they are changing that and putting all the conference facilities over where we had the reception and the library and the patio. So those changes I'm really excited about, and I think the entry is going to look a lot better, in all honesty, because I've always wanted to improve that, but that was going to be a major investment for us. The spa also was an old building, and we didn't change it because we loved the 1950s feel of the architecture. I'm delighted, too, that the spa is being increased. And remember, too, that when spa clients come, it's during the day, and the parking lot is often empty during the day when our guests go out, and the spa closes long before the restaurant is ever used or the guests actually come back into their rooms. So things are working. The expansion is moving, in my mind, forward very positively. Some of our employees do park on the street. There is nothing on MacArthur Street from Austin to Broadway where anyone wants to park or needs to park because there are no houses there. We take up an entire block, and so those spaces are often used by our employees. And our occupancy in Sonoma is only 65%, unlike other cities like Napa for example, is 80% occupancy. So we don't have the 100% filled parking lot that I think you're visualizing. There are always parking spaces in most cases. Our winter occupancy is very low, and our weekend perhaps might reach 80 to 100%. during the summer and spring, but it's not 100%, so those spaces are not full. All I can say is that I'm hoping that you look upon this expansion as a great addition to the town for the locals, because they will love it. And I, too, am looking forward to seeing the progress. Thanks.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Bill Bloom again. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One about encouraging employees to carpool and use alternate transportation. We have always paid 100% for annual bus passes for any employees to encourage them to take a bus to work, and the bus stop is right in front of the hotel, and also provide bicycle parking for the team as well. So that's always been a priority for us, is to try to get people to use alternative transportation to come to the hotel. With regards to valet parking, I believe I just want to clarify, the intention is for local guests that valet parking will be free, and free for overnight guests, but currently we, for the last several years, charge a resort fee to the guests that includes a number of things, from coffee and pastries in the morning, to Wi-Fi, to parking, to use of the spa facilities and those sorts of things. So that's all included in a resort fee, and that resort fee may include parking. So when we say free valet parking, guests staying overnight at the hotel would be paying a resort fee that would include parking as one of their amenities. But for locals, I believe the intention is that they would never charge local guests for coming to use the spa or dining in the restaurant for valet parking. And let me see, what else was I going to talk about? Oh, being a good neighbor, being general manager there for 18 years. I can say, first, I do park on the street when I was there, but I did never park in front of anybody's home. As Suzanne said, all the way up Nathanson Creek Preserve, which we sold to the city as a preserve many years ago. That whole area there is not in front of anybody's home, and also the area where the car lot is, all the way down to Broadway. So when I do park on the street, I would park not in front of anybody's home, just in those spaces. And I'm proud to say that in 18 years, I've never had a neighbor complaint. And I know our two closest neighbors, Morgan Peterson and Victoria Campbell, who live directly across the street as you drive out of the hotel, are big fans of the restaurant. But also, prior to coming, I asked them how they felt about us as neighbors. And Morgan said, well, I just hope it's my dog barking. It hasn't bothered you, because you guys have never bothered me. So being good members of the community and being good neighbors has been something we've always taken pride in. And I know Ruben Canberra, who's the new general manager, we've talked about it, and they certainly want to follow in that same tradition. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and action.
Who wants to start? Okay.
I'm going to start by asking everybody a question. And I don't think parking is really affected on this project, but, I think our job here is to, as I say, be the stewards of the community here. And so I think we need to look at that. But how do we all feel about making this a condition of the use permit, that it stays free? I mean, is that a valid condition?
May I comment on that? Since this is one of the things, is that okay? All right. One of the issues that I've raised, if 50% of the parking was to be valet parking and to be charged for, and the other 50% was open, to be parking, that's one thing. This is 100% valet parked. That means anybody that doesn't want to pay a fee, should one be imposed in the future, is going to park on the street. Personally, I'm not comfortable with that. I think that it's better to have, if it's valet parking, it's valet parking for free, then we know that there's always going to be every parking space that's going to be accommodated for by the use, by this applicant, or any future owners on the property. So my personal feeling is it has to be a condition of approval in order to properly utilize it. I think the parking itself, there's plenty of parking there, okay? I was there today, and of course it was in the, the middle of the day. I'm not concerned about the number of parking spaces or anything else. I'm concerned about the fact that if someone doesn't want to pay a fee, they have no alternative but to park on the street. And I don't think it's a good thing for us to do to a neighborhood, personally.
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I just want to add, I don't think there is free valet parking. I assume you tip. I mean, there will always be a charge to free valet parking, in my opinion. It might be smaller, but generally a valet appreciates a gratuity.
When I came in here tonight, I had some concern about street parking. Over the past couple of weeks, I've talked to a few neighbors. I talked to Victoria Campbell. She's a restaurant manager at Ramekins, and did not feel that felt the neighbors were accommodating to whatever parking that was happening on the street. I kind of discounted that a little bit because she's a restaurant manager. She's sympathetic to this kind of thing. But I talked to somebody a few blocks away that frequents a restaurant and told me that they don't want to take the car down there for right reasons. They don't, they couldn't find parking. They end up walking. I kind of discounted that. But a third person was pretty articulate about, he was 4 or 5 houses down on the other side of MacArthur, and he was pretty articulate and experienced, it sounded like, about people participating at the project, parking on the street. He said they were going down Austin Street, which was somewhat away from his house, but there were a fair amount of cars down there periodically, and fairly often were parking in front of his house and blocked him parking in front of his house. So with the benefit of our speaker from the neighborhood talking about valet parking, it's a concern. The street parking is a concern of mine, and if the valet parking solves that problem, I think it should be a condition. I think it's very important, because if it's known to be free and known to be available, people will go there. I mean, people take valet because it's easy and simple if it's free. Some people don't like to give up control of their cars, so it doesn't matter whether it's free or whether they don't have to tip. They're going to want to park the cars themselves, safety or security or whatever, personal possessions. But I think the valet is going to be essential.
I'd like to just chime in on hotel charges and how that perception of actually if you're staying at the hotel, you're being charged for the valet parking. I don't think, well, I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot of places and stay at hotels and some as beautiful as this. And I never look at like the charges by my hotel bill. Sometimes I don't want to, but I don't think that there's a perception that somebody's going to come to the hotel and say, oh, they're charging me like $20 a day. I'm going to just park on the street. I don't know. Maybe, maybe some people may take that differently and say, like, well, I'm not going to pay $20 a day. So the question, the fact is, they are charging guests, and so the question is, how much? Is it $20 a day? Is it $30 a day? Is it something that you would look at your thing and go, oh my God, I'm paying $30 a day for parking? I'm going to park out on the street for the next 3 days. I don't know. I don't know what the real answer is. Do you say it's okay for guests to park and pay fee as long as it's nominal, or does the operator have a carte blanche in terms of how much they're going to charge? Or do they just turn around to skirt the situation and just charge more per night for the room, and so we don't have this problem? So I'd like to figure out a way that the hotel operator could move forward and not, charge a fee for parking, but fold it into the nightly rate for the hotel room.
Through
So
the
we're
chair.
not dealing with that.
Yeah.
Just a couple of thoughts that staff had, and listening to the commissioner comments. We certainly understand the desire to see some additional language with respect to valet parking. As has been pointed out, I mean, a guest staying at the hotel is one way or another going to be paying for valet parking. That's just a given. But But certainly, we've stayed at hotels where valet parking is a requirement if you're a guest at the hotel. You're paying for it, whether you would prefer not to or not, because that's just how it is built into your charges, as I think Commissioner McDonald was alluding to. So, we would suggest in addition to condition 3E, something along the lines that valet parking shall be required for guests, for hotel guests, and shall be free to non-guests. And we also heard interest in a condition that secure bicycle parking shall be provided for employees, the design and location of which will be subject to the review and approval of the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last one?
Sorry, a requirement for secure bicycle parking for employees subject to review by the Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other issues? I think we've kind of worked the valet thing to death, so.
I have a discussion point that has to do with whether or not we are meeting the parking requirements and taking on the more conservative approach that staff has put together in terms of saying that, this use satisfies and has maximized the parking on site, or whether or not there's actually excess, I won't call banked, but excess parking that provides flexibility. I myself want to see this new operator be successful, and I don't really want to be in a position as a commissioner to have them come back 2 years later and say, we're going to do a special event, we need 5 parking spaces, can we have a temporary use permit? If the commission believes that there could be some flexibility in excess parking. So I think that's still a discussion point that we all have to agree upon and provide clarity for the new owner. And if the commission decides that there is flexibility in additional parking, I have my own personal opinion about the landscaping that's being removed along the frontage of MacArthur, and I don't want to necessarily require that parking space 1 or 2 be converted back into landscaping, but I would like the ability for our Design Review and Historic Preservation Commission, if they so desire and feel that that landscape buffer should be maintained and enhanced and continue in its configuration, that they have the ability to do so because our commission has determined there's excess parking. So I'm kind of trying to provide, in my mind, a maximum of flexibility, but also giving our commissioners that have to review this in the landscape plan in the future also some flexibility in terms of saying, well, we don't want this parking space, we want to keep this one, we want to remove it. So I would like to see our commission go more towards flexibility.
I concur. I also think that one of the beauties to me of going by that site on a regular basis, but not ever having gone in there before, is that you don't even know that it's there. That's the beauty of it. And so removing landscaping that opens up, and I understand that from a marketing perspective and everything, I certainly understand that from the applicant's perspective, but from a standpoint of driving by it as a neighbor, you don't even know it exists, and I think that's the beauty, one of the many beauties of this fabulous site. So flexibility, I'm with. And I also think, if I can make a comment, David, I think that your added condition or amendment to the condition works very well for me on the parking.
Council.
So we've heard testimony tonight that the existing use has sort of functioned well for a long time. We have one neighbor with concerns, but they didn't seem to be extreme. We've heard from other neighbors that I think if this was a major issue in terms of parking, I think there would be a little more concern from the community. I think the point that was made about occupancy rates and fluctuations and our parking standards require, to account for 100% occupancy every night, and the reality is that doesn't always occur. So what I really generally, and I don't want to say anything definitive, but I generally don't like valet parking at all. I think there, and especially at a sort of the agrarian Sonoma style that this hotel is, I just don't like valet parking at all. And so I'm wondering if there's any, and I don't even know if the operator's open to this, but if there's any support for approving this project with, they have 100 spaces and they need 120 without, but also not allowing them to valet park. And that's just my idea. I think I just have a general feel for how it's going to work out. There's a good percentage of people that don't like valet parking, whether it's the charges or they don't want to turn away their car, or they don't want to wait, or they just want to leave and they don't want to stand and wait. I just functionally at Broadway, and this isn't downtown San Francisco, like at Broadway and MacArthur, it strikes me as a solution to try to just fit this in. And I just, you're going to have a lot of traffic on MacArthur going back and forth from that west parking lot to the east, and I just don't like valet parking. And so I would actually be open to approving it. I want to see what everyone else wants to talk about. But it seems like I was under the impression that they only had 86 seats, but it sounds like they had 132 seats in the restaurant functionally for a long time. And so I thought it was a real issue that they were doubling the size of the restaurant. But through, learning during the public hearing, I realized that it's just been existing that way for a long time. And I go by that area a lot, and I see people parking on the street, but as was mentioned, there's a significant street frontage from Broadway to Nathanson Creek. And while there will be future developments in the area, it's just a consideration.
Kelso, I respect your opinion a great deal.
Thank you.
And I hear what you're saying about the valet parking. But I'm sitting here and I'm just trying to keep myself very open-minded about the whole process. And I go there to Saddles for dinner and I meet people, but I'm driving by myself. I wouldn't want to park on the street at night by myself. I mean, you don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen. I wouldn't feel safe out on that street. I would go in and pay.
Well, you would drive in and park in the parking lot.
Right, and pay for the valet parking, or
Right.
pay the tip, just
Well,
for
this
my
doesn't
own.
preclude you from using the parking lot.
Right. So, I think,
I'd like to chime in on the valet versus non-valet. I haven't complimented the architect and the team on and the old owners and the new owners about how much of an asset this facility and this hotel, this destination point for our community is. The combination of the building and the architecture is unique. And I feel proud every time I bring somebody from out of town to MacArthur. And I enjoy experiencing it and walking through it. And I think that's one of the allures, and I think maybe I might be wrong, but I think that's one of the reasons why the operator wants to have valet parking is because they wanted people to immediately get out of their car. They don't want somebody like spending time circulating looking for parking because it creates a different impression and attitude. The whole idea when you're going to a spa or going to a vacation destination or even visiting people that are attending a wedding is that you just want to immediately pretend that you're out of your car. And so I think that it's a positive asset and makes this place work even better. and it creates a better experience for people. So you're focusing on the interior and walking experience, and you're really getting out of your car. And I don't know what air quality impacts there are associated with valet parking, but I can assure you that if you don't have to valet park, you're going to be giving your car to somebody and it's going to be whisked away, and you're not driving around and having your car idle and waiting for a parking space. So because there's some professional person that's doing that for you, knows what they're doing. So there's pluses and minuses to valet, but I think if you take a look at the environmental issue, the guest experience issue, and the fact that there's a professional staff that's really trying to make sure that parking works, I think that the negatives the positives outweigh the negatives, at least in my mind.
What, can I just finish on, if we do want to go with valet, it doesn't sound like I have, a huge amount of support over here. I don't like telling a business that they have to provide a service for free. And that's where I was trying to create a situation where we didn't have to do that. I'm not comfortable with that. I understand the need for it because it's going to happen. It's going to be a problem. But I just personally don't like, mandating that valet has to be free, even though I understand there is a need for it.
May I ask a question of the staff, please? David, it's my understanding that this proposal for the valet parking came from the applicant. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. I, too, am a neighbor to this complex, and I've had the chance to go by this, having all three of my kids attend Presswood schools, so I'm very, very familiar with at least the exterior of the campus. And I had the chance today to actually walk through the various areas and to review those proposed additions. And I was extremely kind of pleased with what I saw overall. And I think it is also valid to say, let's reflect back on the last 18 years of performance and see how it has worked. And I believe that Mr. Bloom, who has the continuity of going back to the beginning, can state that he is not aware of any complaints. So I too believe that this is a quiet gem. I also welcome that opportunity to showcase the Burris House a little bit more. But if there is a condition that I would like to add to that, is because, we are intensifying the use of the parking lot along Broadway that wraps onto East MacArthur. Screen the heck out of it. Don't want to see it. That is not the kind of look we want on Broadway coming into our town. So overall, I can support valet parking because the concept came from the applicant, and I think it is important to amend the conditions as David has suggested. So I overall support this project.
I'm going to jump in a little bit early, but I'm certainly not going to close off further discussion. I think it struck me as I listened to the comments here, it's amazing how the only things that we can talk about are how to handle valet parking and whether there's enough parking on site. And that's a testimony to what a beautiful site it is. And it's a testimony to how well thought out the improvements have been made to the site, that we're not attacking anything about the improvements. All we can do is say, make sure there's enough parking and don't charge very much or don't charge anything for it. So I think that's a very good sign. It's certainly something that I think we're close to agreement on, and I can go either way. I think if we go 100% valet, I think it should be free. I could also even lean the other way and say, well, get rid of the 21 and make it wide open, although I can see maybe valet is a better solution. But I'd be willing to either one of those concepts. It's just that I think that the overall plan, the overall development is sound, and let's try to work through this parking situation and come with a consensus so we can move on with the project.
Could I also bring up the point I raised about seasonal tents and coverage? And I know that the landscape architect has made a compelling argument that based on the landscape plan and how it's designed, there's not a way to be able to do that. But as you all know, and you drive around some of the wine tasting shops or wine tasting areas and some of the facilities such as that people have creatively built tents around trees. And I don't know if I would have support from my commissioners, but I would like to add a condition, and I'm going to continually say this over and over again as every application has outdoor seating, that we add a condition that says that there shall be no seasonal outdoor tenting for outdoor seating.
I'd certainly concur with that.
I do too, but I do too. I support that. I don't think this is the kind of place that's going to have
Right,
the tacky tents.
But also, when the lodge came forward and submitted their plans, they also presented their operational format, and you're seeing a permanent tent there. And even the General Vallejo's daughter's house has a tent, and Ramekins has a tent, and all of these proposals have come forward and have shown beautiful illustratives and very top-notch presentations and operation proposals, and we're still seeing tents in those really beautiful facilities, and I think that it's a detriment to our city to see these tents all over the place. And
Well, if there's concurrence on the part of the Planning Commission, we can certainly add that as a condition that seasonal outdoor tenting shall be prohibited.
Thank you.
I have a question. So obviously a few people, if I can bring it back to valet parking for a second, a few people brought up the fact that the applicant has submitted the valet plan, but they needed to meet 122 spaces, and that was the only way they could do it. And so I'm just curious, is that something they really wanted to do, or they didn't want to do, but that they had to do it to meet the plan, or is it something that maybe we could open up the public hearing to see, or I just want that stated.
I think you can ask a question of the developer without opening the public hearing, if you have a specific question.
Yeah, or, you know what the question is, yeah.
A number of things. First of all, we saw it very simply. We were converting 46 outdoor seats into indoor seats, and to meet that one specific requirement of the development code, it would require, and applying the 50%, it would require 6 more spaces, okay? And then we were aware that we were going to be adding some additional space that would be assigned 1 per 300, and that's how we arrived at the 109 spaces over the current 100 that we have. So we just looked at it very simply, and our hope was not to recast the entire parking requirement calculation. We feel like after analysis of 18 years of use that the site is adequately parked, but at the same time we're aware of concerns of the neighbors about parking on the street and things like that, and so we approached it at the simplest level. More parking is a good thing for this property, and we can do it through valet. So that's the answer to that.
So you want a valet program?
Yeah, can I finish that answer?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. I'm answering his question, Mr. Chairman. The valet parking is part of the experience, so our strategy and the way we operate is what one of the members said, is that you get out of your car and you're at a resort. It's a great place. Great placemaking has occurred. We're going to enhance that, but you're on vacation when you step at MacArthur Place, and it's not a strategy to find more parking spaces. It's a way we will operate the hotel.
While you're up there, do you have any objection to the condition of making it free?
I think Mr. Bloom had a good comment that our operating plan is that the valet parking is free. If you get to the technicality of it, if you're staying in a hotel, you are paying a resort fee. And I think the language that staff proposed, which I didn't write down exactly, seemed reasonable.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more thing. I share Commissioner McDonald's concern about tents showing up. But I wouldn't want the amendment to be open-ended like seasonal. I think tents should be allowed on a very short-term basis. If you ever try to host a outdoor wedding and then the weather turns bad or something like that, I think there should be a time limit on how long a tent can remain, like 4 days or 5 days, and at that point it has to be demounted for X amount of time. So please don't make it no tents allowed. At times, a tent is a good thing, and so as long as it's up no longer than 5 days or 3 days, whatever you think would be a smart move, we would appreciate that flexibility to support events that want to have a covered outdoor area.
Okay, so it comes back to me. Well, I think that I want to be reasonable, and of course, if somebody's planning a June wedding and it rains, I see the need for having a tent. That totally makes sense. But what I object to is, and we see it all over the community, where you have a tent that stays up, it goes up in the end of October, and it stays up all the way through April.
Well, I'm convinced that our planning staff can craft a statement that would cover.
Great. That's my objective.
I'm convinced that we can too. The other two issues that seem like they need to be completed in terms of direction from the commission was that there was a request that, while the number of seats would be capped at 165 indoor and outdoor, could they have a greater proportion of outdoor seating depending on the weather? So that was a request that had been made. And then the other issue is just whether or not you regard them as having a parking surplus.
I'd like to direct a question then back to staff in terms of the rebuttal letter that was turned in. What's your response to the rebuttal?
Well, as we discussed as part of the original staff report, we acknowledge that we're taking a conservative view of the parking requirement, and that given the circumstances of the property and the fact that this is changed to an existing use permit, that other interpretations are possible. We provided an interpretation that the commission could consider that could allow this project to be viewed as having a surplus of up to 16 parking spaces. So different interpretations are possible. It's up to you. I would say that as we read the code, it could be 0 or it could be up to 16, depending on how you choose to interpret the standards, or anywhere in between those numbers.
On the surplus, if we identify a surplus and they decide that due to their success they need to expand one more treatment room, whatever, and it comes back for a use permit, and we've identified some sort of parking issue that has erupted or happened, have those flexible additional parking spaces been grandfathered in, so we won't be able to address a parking issue that may arise?
Well, if you identify, say, years from now that, for whatever unexpected reason, that there is an issue of parking compatibility with the neighborhood, use permits are all about compatibility. So that would be a basis to say, well, you may in theory have this credit, or I don't want to call it a credit, it would be a surplus. This parking surplus, conditions are already incompatible, and so that would be a basis to deny that request. Speaking obviously very generally and hypothetically.
Any of the commission have thoughts on the variability of indoor-outdoor seating and maintaining the total number?
I had brought up the fact that I want to see flexibility for the applicant in terms of operations. And again, more importantly, I'd like the fact that if some of this flexible parking may need to be required for, say, the Design Review Commission wants to see additional landscaping, we have that flexibility, but also for operations and to avoid having any sort of like temporary exceptions or use permits come before us where we have to constantly grant something because our commission has made a determination that there's absolutely no excess parking.
I assume the indoor-outdoor flexibility, if there would be more tables outdoors, where would they go? Like by the pool, or would they have the discretion to put it wherever they wanted, or would it be in the outdoor area, dining area that currently exists?
Since we're talking about restaurant seating, I mean, there aren't an infinite number of places that they could put those seats. They need to be served by the restaurant. So it would just be, I would think just as a practical matter that it would be in proximity to the restaurant in areas that are already designated for seating, but that could accommodate more seats.
I mean, I don't have any issue with the flexibility. I just assumed it was full.
One last thing about that I brought up about employee advantages to commuting. We have language that I think that staff is going to put together about requiring on-site bicycle parking. And Bill had mentioned that the operations already include incentives to pay for bus passes. I'd like to just maybe add some teeth to that to make sure that that continues, because I think that's a really added bonus, and it's something that we should probably require as a standard condition of approval for local employers that, say, employ more than 20 employees, that this becomes something that becomes more standard. Something that we might look at in the future is standardizing, but I'll leave it to staff to come up with.
We have existing language that would accomplish that if that is the direction of the commission.
I'd like to see that if possible.
Are we close enough to making a motion?
Can I make the motion?
Of course.
Oh, my first motion.
You have to turn your microphone.
I'd like to make a motion to approve this project with the condition that the language that staff recommended for the valet parking be used. And I don't necessarily want to put a condition on the tents, but a condition that the tents be used for temporary use only.
Well, could I just go down the list of conditions that we've
Sure.
identified? We have language addressing the valet parking issue that we've read, that that valet parking shall be required for hotel guests and free to non-guests. We have suggested language that secure bicycle parking shall be provided for employees, of which the design and location shall be subject to Design Review Commission approval. We have limitation on seasonal outdoor tents. We have a provision that the
Could we revise that slightly rather than using the word seasonal, make it something more like temporary event usage or something like that?
Yes. We have an allowance that the proportion of outdoor seats can be increased while maintaining the overall number of seats. So those are the conditions, and we have a condition for a employee incentive program for, to encourage transit and bicycle use. So those are the lists of conditions that we've identified so far in the discussion to date, if you wish to include them in your motion. And then, you know,
I so
lastly,
move.
there should just be some direction somehow as to whether or not you believe that there is a parking surplus or not associated with this proposal.
Is that something that we can do? We can actually add an additional finding with the approval that could be.
Well, you know what, it could be direction to staff following the completion of the motion. How about that?
Okay.
I so move what he said.
Do we have a second?
I second the.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I'm not going to be supporting it, but you know why. It's not because I don't, I mean, I'm willing to give them, 100 spaces for all they want to do, but that's why I'm not, it's not because I don't support your project. It's.
I'm going to ask for a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Barnett?
No.
Commissioner Jansen?
Yes.
Commissioner Willander?
Yes.
Commissioner Bohar?
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald?
Yes.
Commissioner Corrado?
Yes.
Chair Felder?
Yes.
The motion passes 6 to 1.
6 to 1. Okay, so now where do we go with this direction to staff, David?
Well, you give me direction as to whether or not you believe that
Whether there's a
there is a
surplus or
parking
not?
surplus associated with this project or not. It could be anywhere from 0 to 16. Sorry, 15.
I guess I'm willing to accept the applicant's count of 12 spaces.
I agree.
I agree as well.
I agree.
I think you have a consensus.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for everybody that's involved in the MacArthur Place, and good luck to your additions to the project.
I have one question as you all leave.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Will the hotel still be in operation as the improvements are made, or is the whole facility closed?
Great question. There's a 3-phase to the renovation. The first phase is the guest rooms. We're just returning our permit to the city with plan check comments. The intention is to continue to run the hotel and have half of the rooms out of order and then complete the rest. The second phase is the barn and the knowledge center, and we'd like to start those as soon as possible once we have a permit. We're just finishing our plans. During that time, we have a plan that we reviewed with building today for a temporary operation of a front desk that we have to work through with planning also. So our intention currently is to continue to operate with sensitivity for the staff that works there. We still have some unknowns on the timing of the project from finishing design and permitting. And the third phase of the project is the spa, which is a bit of it's not fully designed yet.
It's good to know that it'll still remain open at some point.
Yes.
With some parts. Thanks.
Yes.
I'd like to take a 5-minute recess, please.
No, we're not.
So, David, let me find out what I should address item number 4, only to open it to...
Yes, let me just go into that. Thank you, Chair Felder. So,
let me read the item briefly.
Please.
So it's a public hearing on the application of a use permit to reconfigure the Sonoma Cheese Factory, and I'll turn it over to David for the staff report.
Before you do so, I must recuse myself due to proximity.
No, fine. Accept it.
Okay. Are you going to recuse at this point while we just continue it, or are you going to stay here?
No, that's fine. I should.
Why don't you just announce that?
Yeah, it's been brought up that there could be I might be eligible for recusing myself. It hasn't been resolved yet, but in the interest of openness, I should recuse now.
Okay. So turning over to Planning Director Goodison.
Thank you. This is the application for a use permit and related approvals to reconfigure and expand the Sonoma Cheese Factory as a multi-tenant marketplace. Quite late before the meeting, we received a request from State Parks. They would like some additional time to evaluate the project and provide us with their comments. State Parks is a partner of the City of Sonoma. That's certainly how we regard them, and we want to give them that opportunity. The applicants have acceded to that request, and we are therefore asking the Commission to make a motion to open the public hearing on this item and continue it to the meeting of March 22nd.
Thank you. So with that, I will open the public hearing, and I will entertain a motion.
I'd like to make.
Do I have to have public comment?
That public comment is allowed on this item, but public comment is limited to the concept of continuing the item.
Okay. So before I take a motion, would anybody from the public care to comment on it? Thank you. I will bring it back to the Commission for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we continue this public hearing to the March 22nd special meeting.
I've got a question. Go ahead. I'll second, but I have a question.
Okay.
What precipitated this?
A request from State Parks.
Okay, that's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
The missing commissioners may reappear. Moving right along, we are going to item number 5, which is a public hearing for the consideration of draft ordinance amending Title 19 of the Municipal Code by establishing allowances, restrictions, and requirements associated with personal cultivation of recreational and medicinal cannabis. And may I have the staff report, please?
Thank you. I'm going to try to keep this so brief. Back in November of 2016, Prop 64 was adopted by California voters. The passage of Prop 64, which addresses the use of cannabis in both at the personal level and also in terms of certain kinds of commercial activities, has a variety of implications for local governments. And as a result of the passage of Prop 64, the City Council adopted several moratoria addressing those activities in order to allow the development of permanent regulations. So this is proceeding on a two-track process. The city is investigating options related to commercial cannabis, and in fact, we have some workshops scheduled in that regard coming up in March and April. And at the conclusion of those workshops, we'll be going back to the City Council to obtain additional direction on what they're looking for in that regard. But in the meantime, we have council direction with respect to the personal cultivation of cannabis. That is the cultivation of cannabis by an individual household. And in essence, the council is seeking regulations that would limit personal cultivation, and this applies to both medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis, to the minimums that are allowed for under state law. So With that direction, with respect to indoor cultivation, the personal cultivation of up to 6 plants per residence would be allowed subject to restrictions, while the outdoor cultivation of cannabis would be prohibited. So that's the ordinance that we've drafted. Now, when we talk about indoor cultivation, that could be both within a residence, but it could also be within a greenhouse, subject to certain restrictions. And among those restrictions, the primary use of the property must be for a residence. Areas used for cultivation have to comply with the building code. There's a limitation on the wattage of grow lights. There's a prohibition on the use of gas products such as butane and natural gas or generators. Any fully enclosed structure used for the cultivation of cannabis must have a ventilation system. While a greenhouse-like structure may be allowed, it needs to be located within a rear yard setback and must maintain a minimum 10-foot setback from any property line. Secure locking systems are required. And again, we have these limitations on the number of plants. So those are the basic rules that are in place now under the moratoria, and the council is in essence seeking to adopt them as permanent regulations, and that's what the ordinance in front of you would do. So we're asking you to review this ordinance, provide any comments or suggestions that you might have with regard to its provisions, and forward it to the council for adoption. Thank you.
All right, I will open it up to the public if anyone cares to speak. I'll bring it back to the commission.
Well, I had a question for David. Are all the sort of, not necessarily controversial, but areas within this ordinance that have room for debate, were those already decided by the city council? I mean, is this just sort of pro forma putting it through?
Well, staff developed an ordinance that followed the direction of the city council. This ordinance is a draft. It's now in front of the planning commission for your review, and you are reviewing it. And so if there are areas that strike you as subject to other considerations, that's the purpose of this review. So I'm not trying to suggest that this needs to be rubber stamped at all, but the ordinance reflects the direction that we received from the council. Let me just put it that way.
So the council determined what they thought about, for example, written consent of the property owner. I could see where that would be, or maybe not. Is that common in other municipalities that have already done that?
I don't know whether or not it's common. I could not say. And I will say that that was an issue of discussion on the part of the city council, and that there was not unanimous agreement on the council with respect to that provision.
Because the way I'm reading it is Prop 64 gave Californians the right to cultivate 6 marijuana plants inside, correct? But if you're a renter in the city of Sonoma, you have to get permission.
From the landlord. And I believe, and I'm sorry that I don't know for certain, so I'm going to have to just say that right off the bat, but I believe that a requirement for property owner consent is valid under Prop 64. So,
okay.
You know, I don't think it's an
that's
extra layer that applies to a renter. And I'm a renter, so I'm used to all of those extra layers. But I don't think that it is something that Prop 64 doesn't allow for.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about the cultivation inside of like a greenhouse or structure. One of the questions that I have has to do with the limitations of total number of structures, and so conceivably, unless I didn't really focus on language, but I just want to make sure that we have safeguards, that we don't have 6 theoretical grow houses, 1 per plant, that we can have language that limits the number of structures to only 1 for growing, period, per property. And number 2 is There are exemptions from the Uniform Building Code and from our own code that don't allow for building permits. And some structures can be on property line, and I believe I just want to make sure that we have setback requirements for these types of things, so they're not like if it's under 8 feet and it's under 100 square feet, it can be right on property line, so we're not causing issues with neighbors, so that there's a special performance standard for little structures to grow, and that there's adequate setbacks, and there's limits on the number, and maybe the commission might agree that these special exceptions might require an actual building permit. So I don't know if that's something that we can do, or, we would be overreaching our authority as a commission, but I just wanted to throw those out in the universe and so we can talk about them.
Well, let's just go down the list. There is a 10-foot setback requirement, so that's a different setback requirement than would, than otherwise might be applicable to an accessory structure, which could be otherwise located as close as 5 feet. Second, if you wanted to add language or suggest that the council consider adding language that would limit grows in a detached structure to a single structure, that's certainly a recommendation that you could make to the city council. Third, we can only require a building permit when the building code requires a building permit. We can't just say you need a building permit because we would like that to happen. It has to be triggered by something in the building code.
Okay, good. So thank you so much.
A follow-up to that. It seems like there are a lot of conditions as far as how they can grow indoors, as far as certain heights, locks, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like there would be an advantage to somehow require a permit. So you're basically saying that because it's not part of the UBC, or that we can't, because if I'm reading here correctly, it talks about you can't use gas products, can't do this, can't do that, and all of a sudden, so what's the enforcement going to be, or the verification that they have built this accessory structure per the requirements?
Well, it's a fine line. Under Prop 64, the city can't prevent a household from growing up to 6 plants within its residence. We cannot do that. And I think that the city attorney's office would be concerned about a licensing requirement for personal cultivation of cannabis. I'm not sure that that kind of requirement could be supported under the law. You can require standards, but I'm not sure that you could require another type of permit or license that could be considered discretionary.
I have a question for you, David. So basically, just to comply with state law, the city has to allow for 6 or fewer plants, minimalist, okay, inside the residence. That's the minimal requirement to be met.
Correct.
Okay. But we don't have to allow it in an accessory structure.
Actually, under Prop 64, you can't simply limit it to a residence. It could be some other enclosed structure. So our draft ordinance does provide for it to be in a detached enclosed structure that's not a residence.
Okay.
And that's considered indoor cultivation.
Then the second question for you then is, with the differential setbacks and so forth, and this was raised, at the last discussion that we had, a more generic discussion on this, there is no real way to enforce that, and especially if a permit cannot be required, as we were talking about, correct?
Well, I would not agree with that statement. I mean, there are many regulations that we all live by that don't require a permit as a method of verifying enforcement. To take an example from a different realm, on certain highways you can't drive faster than 55 miles an hour. You don't apply for a permit, verifying that that's your intent to do that, but that's the law, and it is enforced. And if there are reports of issues associated with the cultivation of cannabis within a structure, then inspections can be required and the standards can be enforced.
So, so state law is all about indoor. We have the right to ban outdoor.
Correct.
Because it seems like there's and again, this may shock people, but I really have no experience with growing cannabis, but I really don't know about it. But just reading about, butane, it just seems like seems to be more dangerous growing it indoor than outdoor, and so.
Well, there are different risks associated with each type of activity. And I'm not trying to, I have no issues with Prop 64 or any of this, but, it's just a fact that cannabis is a valuable commodity. And it's not really traceable, and it's quite portable, and there's an established offline market for its sale. So, one of the issues with outdoor cultivation is just the attractive nuisance risk of theft and burglary, and that can be a real risk.
Right. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought the whole point about protection if it's outside of the domicile and what steps people take to protect it, especially if it's not in a secured, locked environment. So there are some externalities if people are going to build a greenhouse or some sort of structure to accommodate that. There could be issues with respect to people putting security fences around their property that may violate our fence code. There might be instances, and I'm just thinking out loud, where somebody may choose to put that type of a greenhouse on their roof or elevated above, like say above their garage and on a patio, and technically say it's in a greenhouse, it's covered, it's indoors, but it's like on a second floor patio to protect it. And so, I mean, this is the reality, and it's not so much of a problem until neighbors start crying nuisance, and then these things come before our commission. So, like, I think it is really important that we kind of like think outside of the box and think of like all the scenarios where they may not be coming in for fencing for their grows, but they're coming in for fence exceptions to protect their 6 plants because they're outside. And so these are all like things that we should think about, fencing and whether or not they should, if they're in a greenhouse, do they stay on the ground floor? Can they be elevated? Can they be on a rooftop deck? All these, I think these are all valid things, only in the sense that we may see these things come before us in the next few years once this is legal. And I mean, I'm throwing it out there. Would we allow somebody to have a fence exception to protect their?
Well, we always have that discretion.
We have the discretion. So
I don't see that as being an issue because we can make the decision. We have, I think we have sufficient code in place to enforce those requirements.
Even on rooftop decks or on, say, for example, patios where people have decided to put things on patios to protect them.
Well, again, right now this ordinance is drafted calls for any cultivation to occur within a fully enclosed and secure structure. And that is defined in the ordinance.
Okay, so I think we have enough safeguards in place to.
I'd love to hear a motion to recommend this to City Council.
I'd like to amend that motion to consider our commission's discretion and limiting any outdoor enclosed structure to just one per parcel.
Well, is that a motion with that amendment?
Yes.
I second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Passes 7-0.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
So that takes care of that. So you pass that recommendation on to the city council. And we have moved to issues update.
Which is at your place.
Anything significant to call out?
There's more than we could possibly review, so
Okay.
I'm just gonna answer question.
So we're going to handle both MacArthur and Broadway, as well as handle both MacArthur and Broadway and the cheese factory on the 22nd?
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Which one will go
Well-
first?
The cheese factory.
And from what I understand, there's also going to be Walt Wines that night?
No.
We're not gonna do that night.
Okay. Well, at the risk, I mean, I don't even know if I'm allowed to even mention that, but I could see that going until 9 to 10 o'clock.
Well, I think that we'll send out an email to the planning commission to determine whether or not there is interest and availability to begin the meeting early. It's up to you guys. It's up to the commission, so.
Okay.
All right.
So along with that, though, is it just awkward for staff to be getting back to an applicant saying, look, given the nature of this particular project, it is our recommendation that we defer it one more month, or what? Is that the awkwardness?
Well, there is a degree of awkwardness there, no doubt about it. I will have that conversation, and we'll see how it goes.
If I could add to that awkwardness, I really personally think that both those projects, one of which I will not be able to participate in, really require all hands on, like, just a fresh situation. And so, I mean, if they could do that other project like the next day or the day before, I mean, I know that they're noticing issues, but it would be nice to have, you know.
I'll look at different alternatives and present those to the commission. How about that?
I think that's, because it's an awful lot to take on in one night.
Yeah, I totally understand.
Any other comments from the commission?
The fence on the bike path is still up.
I'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
And I wanted to also ask about the status update of the townhouse redevelopment and renovation along West Napa. The buildings are all boarded up, and I was wondering what was going on with that. I think I asked last.
Well, the last I heard, they were just having difficulty finding a contractor because there's a shortage of contractors right now. But I did see some activity there last week, which I hope meant that they found somebody, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
We're on comments. You may.
Question. I don't know the evolution or the history of our not-so-loved tent on the corner of Spain and First Street West at the tasting room. Do we have any leverage to have that thing disappear?
We're talking about Roche?
Yes.
I don't know. I've never looked at it, but if directed to, actually we are going to take a look at that. We never have before. We've never received any complaints about it, so I'm not at all familiar with its history or how it came to be, but we have been asked about that, so we are going to look into it.
I do remember sitting on the Design Review Commission when we reviewed the renovation, and the additional lightings is a departure from what I recall. Even the additional Christmas lightings, it's a departure from what we originally approved for lighting. And I know that's another thing that I always raise, and David always rolls his eyes. But like, I just abhor the idea of adding Christmas lights to everything to accentuate advertisement. So the tent just exacerbates
Are you
it.
talking about the white lights,
Yes, there was a number of lights, including glass lights, that we approved, and there are additional lights above and beyond what we approved on the Design Review Commission, which were never permitted, which exacerbates the illumination at that property.
Commissioner McDonald, can you tell me which one you're talking about there?
Roche.
Roach,
Roche, okay.
next to the girl in the fig.
In fact, I believe that the illumination from that disturbs the tenants in the hotel next door. Although you wouldn't.
Are there any
From the
other
owner.
comments from the commission?
Yeah, I do. Again, this may be a logistic issue, but on projects like item number 4 today that was not heard, and others that have a voluminous amount of information, is there any opportunity that the commissioners can get a hold of at least some of the information sooner than just the last week? Because for me, and I can only speak for myself, to personally carve out huge amount of time in a 7-day week is tough, and I want to make sure that I do my proper review. So there's the
Well,
question.
let me just say right now that the initial study for the Gateway project is on the city website right now. You can begin reviewing it at any time, and we'll send you a link to that.
Okay, and we have the materials for the cheese factory now.
David, I just
Although
had-
there may be,
Oh, I'm sorry.
there will be additions, I'm sure. Go ahead.
I just have a couple of comments about, I kind of echo that feeling about getting the information as soon as we possibly can, because it was a lot of work on this agenda. That being said, what's interesting to me is that, the cheese factory was on this agenda, and we had a pretty packed agenda for this one, so I don't see why we can't handle just 2 items, including that one.
Well, I
another
understand, but we saw tonight, too, that an item that I personally thought would not take very long ended up taking quite a long time. And so we can always be surprised in terms of how an agenda item can go, even if it seems like it's a relatively simple one. And neither one of the ones that we're referring to at the moment are very simple. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to develop some options for the commission to look at, and you can get back to me and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd second that.
I didn't make the motion.
Oh, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn tonight's meeting.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourned.